have the Stacy Hughes letter there?
Right here.
Is that mine? Is all my stuff?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
Mine has got you organized.
Can't live without her.
Nope.
She called meeting to order.
Okay. That's interesting.
Oh, yeah, Sharon's gonna be here.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but not until 7:30.
7:30.
Okay, so this is all Sharon's stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget, I turned up nighttime medicine.
I'll wake you right up. Don't worry. Just so you know, that's the timeline for the. Yeah. Okay.
Just tell me if...
Thank you, Carol,
Oh,
for this.
you're welcome. It's
Wait.
Joe. It's helpful.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
Mm.
Thank
And
you
it's
very much.
concise. How you doing? That's a good thing.
Oh, is it?
It is.
Oh, okay.
It's medical assisting.
Then I'll open it.
Yeah, it's for the medical assisting. Nothing scary.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the ribbon cutting.
Oops, this is bias.
Sharon's already here.
Oh, Jesus. Good.
How you guys doing? Can't complain. You weathered your first executive session. Smooth.
I'll give you one.
They want you to stick around.
Ah.
Thank you. Yes.
Jared? Jared? Would you like a water?
Tim's not gonna report out again.
Margie, you all set?
Please, thank you.
Oh, God.
My coat. I left it in the other room. In the conference room. Yeah. I just won't leave without it.
Thank you. Oh, one and done.
Yeah. No, that's all right. I'm like, all right, so would you meet with us? And he said, yeah. I said, okay. He goes, anytime, night or day. He was funny.
So what are we doing, calling the students up?
Can you give him a second?
Sure.
That was very nice.
He's already back. Look up.
Oh, see, I wouldn't even be down there yet.
Hurry up and talking.
That's what I'm thinking. I would-
Much better. Couldn't feel much better.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. Before we go to our regular committee meeting, we do have the privilege today to have our high school students here, and I wanted to invite Mr. Buckley up. Mr. Buckley, maybe if you want to come forward and bring the students up for their report. All right. Well, welcome. Maybe if we could please go around and introduce yourselves and your name and what year you are.
My name's Dylan, and I'm a senior.
Great.
My name's Josie, and I'm a senior.
My name's Sophia, and I'm a junior. I'm Rachel, and I'm also a junior.
Great. Well, congratulations. Nice to have you here, and I appreciate your work. It really does provide some value to us to hear what you have to say, what's taking place at the school, comments and questions you may have, and your thoughts. They matter to us, and when we have our discussions, what you talk about is things that we also discuss. So it brings a lot of value what you talk about. So why don't I turn it over to you guys, and however you like to start, whoever wants to kick things off, please go right ahead.
So we just wanted to start off with talking about the library in the high school. There's a lot of changes going on. We got rid of one set of desktop computers and the Chromebooks. There's 3 carts, so one cart normally stays in the library, and students and teachers are able to use those. And then the other 2 carts are able to go around the school, and a lot of teachers utilize that for in class time for projects and stuff and essays. And then NHS also uses the library. Every day there's about 4 or 5 students that'll stay after. Everyone rotates off, and they help students tutor in all core subjects, and even some specialized ones if students ask for it. And then also student council is running we're doing a prom dress fundraiser this year. So it's designed in order to help students who normally can't pay for dresses to go to prom or to wear to prom, or if girls want an extra dress if they're going to both junior and senior prom. The dresses are selling between $5 and $10, and all of the money that is being raised is going to the Battered Women's Fund. And then also different classes such as fashion and design are offering discounts. They're also doing free alterations for all students.
Great. Thank you, Dylan. Thank you. Josie? Yeah.
So on behalf of the senior class, we had cap and gown measurements the first week of January, so graduation's vastly approaching, and it's surreal. We have our student-faculty basketball game on February 24th with a snow date of March 9th. That's a great fundraiser for our class. It makes a lot of money, and it's also a really fun event to come. I'm sure many of you have heard of it, and we had it last year. It was a big success. Also, we have our spaghetti supper on April 2nd. This is the mother of all fundraisers for us. We make so much money, and we had a meeting for it just this Monday, and one of the co-chairs of the spaghetti supper did mention to me that the first spaghetti supper, they made only $400, and they were excited about it. Last year, they made $27,000, and we're hoping this year to surpass that, maybe break 30. But we got already a lot of donations from local businesses, and even businesses from Saugus, Wilmington, and neighboring towns. Pocari's and Saugus is willing to donate all the bread and oil, and Spinelli's is willing to donate the desserts, and it's just an awesome fundraiser. Every 2 weeks we have a parents meeting, and the week following that we have a children's meeting, so it's a great thing to get involved with. For senior week, which is basically what we're all saving up for, we have prom to kick off the week on May 26th at Park Plaza in Boston. On May 31st, we have the senior banquet at Spinelli's. Convocation is on June 2nd, and of course, graduation's on the 3rd. These dates will be here before we know it.
Great, thank you.
So midterms concluded last week, and all the teachers are getting used to the MMS online grading system. So now students are able to log in and see their grades and the assignments that they're missing and that they completed. So that's been really helpful for all the students, and also the parents can see them. The juniors also were starting a mentoring program. So people have been matched up with mentors in the field they want to go into. So that's been very beneficial for them. Winter sports, basketball, hockey, both boys and girls are doing very well. Track, they have their NEC meet on Friday. Gymnastics and wrestling and swimming are all doing very well also. Challengers basketball, which is basketball on Monday nights for intellectual and physically disabled children, was able to play a halftime show at the girls' varsity basketball game on Friday, and there was 14 kids playing, so that was very well and successful. And Best Buddies chapter, which is for intellectual and psychologically disabled children, has 60 participants at the high school. They have an event coming up on Friday. And then the ribbon cutting ceremony for the medical assisting classroom is February 10th. So the students can get into the classroom. There's a lot of new technology, so that's very exciting.
Great, thank you.
So for the junior class, on March 18th, we have the junior prom coming up. It's going to be 6 to 10 p.m., and it's at the Andover Country Club. Tickets will be on sale next month. And we also have the dodgeball tournament coming up, run by the junior class. It's going to be sponsored by Above the Influence, which is a great asset to have for us, for the junior class. And that's going to be on March 10th. We also just recently had a YPVD High Night on January 21st. It was last Thursday. And we had teachers, students, department head, and some of you guys speak there. And it was really a success. And a lot of the 8th graders and parents came, and it really gave them a great insight to what to expect when they come up to the high school. I toured a bunch of kids and parents, and all of them were just in awe of how big the building was. So I think it was really great for them to get to see what they're going to be experiencing for the next 4 years. And lastly, we had districts at Merrimack College for the DECA Club, which is Distributed Education Clubs of America. And I went to districts. It was a great experience. And 53 DECA teams moved on and advanced to states, which is going to be in Boston at the Copley Marriott, and that's going to take place this March. And we actually have 3 DECA members here today that are going to speak about their project. So we're very excited to hear about that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that report. Too often we hear, the negative things that are taking place and try to make improvements, and it's wonderful to hear a lot of the positives that are taking place, and each of you did a wonderful job explaining that, and I want to thank you for your continued work and letting us know what's taking place. As I said earlier, it's very valuable to us to hear what's taking place and to hear the positive things that are going on, so I want to thank you for your time and efforts. Thank you. Mrs. Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and students, thank you. That was a really good report. I have a question, and I'd like to put it to the students if it's okay. We have an issue coming up tonight with field trips. We're going to be discussing policy about overnight field trips, out-of-state field trips. And I know that this has been discussed up at the high school, and I didn't know if any of you were going on that trip or were talking about it or anything, but if you'd like to share with us what some of your some of your thoughts are on how decisions are made about the field trips, I would say this would be a chance. We could hear from you, and we might even be able to tell you a bit about it, or if you'd like to stay to hear that discussion, you will definitely learn a lot about it. It's a very difficult topic, and it's very involved, and we're trying to work on some of those things. So, if that's okay, Mr. Chairman?
Sure, if they'd like to stay. But
We're putting you on the spot.
yeah, let's put them on the spot, all right, Mrs. Dunn. If there's it's okay if you don't want to, but if you like to, okay.
I'll just take it off the stand. Okay, so on behalf of the students who are planning on going on the Italy trip in April, I actually have a few of my friends with me tonight to talk about it. So our concerns were, we understand like the security-wise and the dangers that involve this trip. The only problem we had was EF Tours usually gives an informational session regarding the safety of the trip. And even if you feel like it's not safe enough for our town or to send students of our own to this trip, we do feel like we should have had the chance to hear them out, hear their opinions on it. I believe Mrs. Abby Gore, I trust her with my life. She's like a second mom to me as well. So I wouldn't mind going on this trip with her, knowing that EF Tours was actually guiding it. I have gone on a trip before with EF Tours, and they were extremely amazing. With that said, I feel before we make a final decision based on the Italy trip, we hear them first, maybe have a meeting with the parents, the students going on the trips, school committee, and EF Tours and their representatives.
Great. Thank you, Josie. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. Just wanted you to have the chance to be able to let us know what you thought. It really is a very difficult decision, and it's just such a huge issue. But I think if you can stay and hear that discussion, it would be very interesting for you. But you just did your student advisory. You represented your fellow students and spoke for them, and that's really, really impressive. Thank you.
So, thank you, Mr. Buckley. I think we have some other students here today that we wanted to introduce and maybe
Yes,
come up.
I'll hang over this way, and I'd like to have your notes brought to my office tomorrow because I need to put all that on my calendar. Our meeting today, I was actually sitting there like most of you going, oh, all right, we have that coming up too. And we really probably didn't even touch on everything, so it was one of those situations today where we had kind of meetings colliding. So I know you met with Mrs. Maniatis and talked about a lot of the things you wanted to talk about, but we also have the PSATs also for the sophomores coming the last week of February. I think it's the Wednesday. It's the 20, whatever that last Wednesday is. I don't want to say the date. So still a lot of other things going on. Really excited about our students. They do a great job every time they come here, and just really a nice opportunity too for me to sit with some students in my office, although not so much today. But we talk about a lot of the things that go on in school and what they see. Before the holiday break, we had an opportunity to go into Mass General through some people that I had become familiar with, and they were able. We talked with Decker and Bella and Haley and Gianna, came up with this project. It was, and I forget the name again. What? A Blanket of Hope, and they made all these blankets and raised all this money. Excuse me. And then you did over 30 blankets, close to 40 blankets that they presented to the pediatric ward at Mass General, so at the Yawkey building. And when talking with Mr. Simmons, who usually goes into Boston to perform. We also had the opportunity, Isaac De Silva is here with us too. He was with a group that also sang at the hospital. So I'd just like them to maybe come up and quickly talk about their experience and what it meant. And I was actually standing off to the side, and all these people that were hearing them sing were just in awe. And I was very proud to say that they were Peabody Veteran Memorial High School students.
Well, welcome to each of you, and it's terrific that work you did. And maybe if you could just introduce yourselves, your name and your grade, and then maybe if one of you can, or all of you can talk a little bit about the project that you worked on.
Isaac De Silva, and I'm a senior.
Great.
Bella Shula, and I'm a senior. Haley McCarran, and I'm also a senior.
Gianna Frangello, and I'm a senior.
Great. So please, yeah, maybe if you can maybe just talk a little bit about your experiences and the project. Thank you.
So we created the project to donate blankets to the kids at Mass General in the cancer unit. We got in contact with Heather Peach, which is one of the child care life specialists, and we raised money through a bunch of different ways. We got DECA involved and kids throughout the school, and a GoFundMe page where friends and family and different local businesses could donate money to our account. So we made about 31 blankets after communicating with Heather and trying to figure out how many kids were there to make sure that everyone got at least one blanket. We wrapped them up so it was like a gift from us to the holidays, and then, so yeah. And we met a bunch of amazing people. We met directors of the cancer unit and chiefs of all these amazing people who are just so smart and gonna further. Do you guys want to say anything?
When we got to the hospital and Isaac and all the rest of the chorale sang, it was life-changing because everyone was so distracted from what was really going on by the happiness of the season, and getting to bring the blankets and how everyone appreciated it so much felt so good, and it was a great experience.
Our main goal was to at least put a smile to each patient's face during such a hard time and such a happy holiday. And we just wanted to make sure that they enjoyed, even though they're in the hospital setting, we wanted to make sure that they had a present to unwrap and know that it was from Peabody DECA.
As just one part of chorale, I know that everyone in chorale had a really great experience singing for everyone at the hospital, and just looking down and see all the smiling faces of all the patients, and just to see how happy they are when they were distracted and listening to tunes. It felt truly amazing.
Well, I just want to thank you. Really, that is wonderful. You should be very proud of yourselves. We're very proud of you to care and to make that effort to try to touch other people's lives, people who are having difficulties. That's really meaningful, and I know that you brought a lot of joy to them. And we as a city, very proud of that, very proud of you, and it's wonderful that you came today. And we just want to thank you. That was terrific, so thank you. Thank you, Mr. Buckley. That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, while they're going back to their seats, I just wanted you to know that I happened to be able to go to both events that we're talking about tonight. I was at Mass General with Mr. Buckley, and you said the right words, how proud these kids have made this community. I was so proud to be there with you, and to hear the kids sing was beautiful. And I did want to commend Mr. Buckley and his staff for the Why Peabody High Night. That was extremely well attended, and it was a job well done. So thank you to all the kids and the teachers and administrators who helped put that program together. It was really well done. So congratulations on that, Mr. Buckley.
Great. Thank you. So now we will go to the regular school committee meeting, today being January 26, 2016. The meeting is being recorded by the Peabody School Committee's recording secretary, Marge Marcarelli. The matters listed below on the agenda are those reasonably anticipated by the chair, which may be discussed at the meeting. Not all items listed may in fact be discussed, and other items not listed may also be brought up for discussion to the extent permitted by law. I'd like to first start the meeting out. If everybody would please rise for a moment of silence. Thank you, and if everybody could please stay standing and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, and we have a couple of housekeeping items. We do have some minutes from January 4th, 2016.
Motion to receive and approve.
Okay.
Second.
Thank you. You've heard the motion by Mrs. Dunn to approve the minutes of January 4th, 2016, which was our organizational meeting, seconded by Mr. Rossignol. Roll call vote, please.
Yes.
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 And we also have the January 12th, 2016 minutes. Mrs. Dunn?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to table that item for the next meeting so that the secretary could have a chance to correct something on those minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Second.
Seconded by Mrs. Carpenter. All in favor? That's a vote? No, but that's okay. It's all in favor. Yep. Next item is approval of bills.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve warrant A, number 2940, dated January 26th, in the amount of $645,381.49, subject to audit.
Second.
Thank you. You've heard the motion by Mrs. Carpenter to approve warrant 2940, seconded by Mr. Rossignol. Roll call vote, please.
Yes.
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 Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve warrant B, number 2941, dated January 26th, 2016, in the amount of $2,423,283.57, subject to audit.
Second.
Thank you. You've heard the motion by Mrs. Carpenter for approval of warrant 2941, seconded by Mr. Rossignol. Roll call vote, please.
Yes.
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 Okay, thank you. In light of some people that we have here today, I recommend we take some items out of order to not hold people up so we can address some of the issues that they may be here on today.
No objection.
Any objection?
No.
Thank you. Dr. Levine, is there a certain topic that you'd like to go to first?
Well, we do have Sharon Cameron, our Director of Health, in the audience, who's going to make a presentation on a couple of items, but we do have some parents and students here that I think are here about the overnight field trip policy. So I would suggest going to that first so that the parents and students can say what it is that they would like and hear the discussion.
Okay, I'm acceptable to that. Is everybody okay with that? How do we want to do this?
I don't mind leading off, or
Go right ahead.
Dr.
Mrs.
Levine.
Carpenter, why don't I turn it over to you?
Thank you. Just a little background about how this came onto our agenda. Most of the committee members are aware, for the public's benefit, there was a field trip scheduled through Ms. Gore, the social studies, through the social studies department, a trip to Italy. I believe it was going to be Patton's route, and our superintendent, who I have the utmost respect for, and I respect your decision, had decided to cancel that trip to Italy based on safety concerns, and I do respect that decision. After that had happened, several students had reached out to me, as well as some parents, questioning the authority that the superintendent had to make that decision to cancel a trip. And at that time, I did believe that it was his sole discretion. Upon further review and some correspondence through MASC, this board was informed that we do have some authority over that decision. With that being said, I did ask for the overnight field trip policy to be put on our agenda for us to discuss. My history on this committee has been in regards to field trips that what had happened was we were not getting them in a timely manner, or the PTOs would get an incredible offer that they couldn't pass up, and they would get permission from the superintendent to take the field trip because it couldn't make it to our desks in time to get that permission. So we said that that was fine for that superintendent to do that because we didn't want anybody to miss out on a trip. Since that time, we've had them in our packet for review. There's never really been any type of issues. Now that the Italy trip has come up, it has raised the issue. There's a couple of things that I do want to hand out for the committee. I have some letters here that were addressed to us in regards to previous trips that our students had taken through EF Educational Tours for Europe. And I just wanted you to have, this is one of them.
Motion to receive.
Second.
All in favor? It's a vote?
Hold on, and I have another one. This is just to give you an idea of what they had done in the past. It's something that has happened before, and the type of things that they got to do. Can I have the same motion for the second letter, please?
Same motion.
Here's another letter from 2004.
Yeah, all in favor? That's approved.
Thank you. So it has come to my attention, in addition to the canceled trip, our students will be at a loss of some monies, which is very unfortunate. I've also been informed that we do have a representative here from EF Educational Tours to discuss what the trip entails. If you would like to take a moment to read those letters and see what the previous trips have entailed, and then if it's the will of the chair, we could possibly have some information from EF Tours or questions from the committee members or any of the students or parents during maybe taking public participation out of order.
I have no objection.
I think that would be a great idea.
Okay, so moved.
What would you like to have first?
Why don't we have...
The will of the committee? Would you like to hear EF Tours or the...
I'd like to hear EF Tours.
I would as well.
Would you be prepared to speak? If you don't mind, could you come up right over on this side? And there's a seat here for you.
Sure. My name is Carrie Ann Driscoll. I'm from EF Education in Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So, thank you through the chair. If you wouldn't mind just sharing with the committee what you generally do, how the tours are run, you know, what could possibly make this one different from the others or not different from the others. Just give us a little background. It might answer a few questions before they come out.
Sure. So the original itinerary that the high school students were scheduled to travel on was one of our Italy-based tours. So the tour was Rome to Sicily. So if you think about the boot of Italy, basically the students start off in Rome, travel down, they visit the Sorrento region all the way down to Sicily, and then up they get the opportunity to visit Capri, Pompeii, and then return back to Rome. So Rome really acts as their home base in and out of Italy on this tour.
I'm yielding to the committee at this moment.
Any questions by the board? Ms. Dunn?
Actually, I've got several questions. One would be, when people take a tour with your company, Are folks encouraged to take out trip insurance for that trip? Or is it available through you?
Sure, we do offer trip insurance. It's actually through a third-party provider, but families are able to purchase it when they purchase the tour at the same time. And that trip insurance covers pretty much the most common items that people put in claims for. So pre-tour, it would cover things such as an illness or an injury that would prevent the student from being able to travel on the tour. If a parent loses their job or there's a major change in income, that is also covered by the insurance company. And then it also covers on-tour issues, so medical emergencies, in addition to stolen property. Those are the primary things that are covered under the policy. So not all students are required to purchase it, and so it's really on a family-by-family basis. And some students and families opt to purchase trip insurance directly through a multitude of companies that sell trip insurance.
Okay. And through the chair,
Yes, he's done.
under the trip insurance, if a trip is canceled due to an advisory from the State Department, do you know how that's handled?
So there are differences in State Department advisories. So what was issued following the aftermath of the Paris attacks is what the U.S. State Department classifies as a warning alert. And so there's really two primary stages to the State Department's alert system. There are travel alerts, and then there are travel warnings. So after Paris, a worldwide travel alert was issued by the State Department. It was actually the 5th worldwide travel alert that's been issued since 2009, I believe. The most recent one was after the cafe bombings in Sydney. And really what it does is it basically directs U.S. citizens who are traveling anywhere, and that's even domestically. So the worldwide travel alert is also to, New York, D.C., Boston, I guess technically. And it's just asking people to remain vigilant, understanding that there are risks associated, and just to basically have their eyes and ears open when traveling. The second category is a travel warning. So for instance, right now the U.S. State Department has a travel warning for Mexico for U.S. citizens. And now those are areas where the State Department advises against travel. So the State Department doesn't come out and say you cannot necessarily travel there, but they strongly advise when they use a travel warning that it is unsafe to travel. So under the insurance policy from the third-party provider, there is not a terrorism clause associated with that. However, when school groups travel with EF, there are 3 different ways that the school and the district are always covered. So 2 of them are always included. One is optional, which is the individual traveler insurance that we just discussed. The other 2 is, so first, EF holds a $50 million liability policy, and that's per incident. And that basically covers a district regardless of if a trip is school sanctioned or not. So the vast majority of our schools are not school sanctioned trips. Normally districts and boards opt to not get involved nationally. I think that's a little bit different in New England. We see a lot more school board types of sanctioning or district level sanctioning in different ways. But that policy does cover the district, like I said, regardless of whether or not it's school sanctioned, and there is terrorism coverage in that. The second way that groups are covered is through EF, which is our peace of mind policy. And what that states is that a group can opt to change their tour for any reason up to 45 days before the tour. And so they can change their itinerary, they could change their date, and then after 45 days, that same option is available to the group if the State Department makes a travel warning to the country that they are visiting. So they're covered in that way as well. Does that help clarify?
It does.
Great.
One other question, Mr. Chairman. Those last 2 from EF, are those automatic, or does this group have to select those?
No, those are automatically covered. That's part of traveling with EF.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Hockman?
Thank you. Through you, hi, Ms. Driscoll. Thank you for coming here tonight. Can you just, I don't have any children that have gone on a tour or a trip with your company yet. Can you just describe what a typical day would be? In other words, so if students were to fly from Logan to Rome, they'd arrive in Rome and there would be a motor coach waiting for them. They'd be transported to a hotel, and then they'd travel to their tour sites by motor coach?
Yes. So it varies depending on the itinerary. In the Rome itinerary, you are on motor coach for the vast majority of the time. There is a ferry that takes you to Capri and for part of the tour. But for this tour specifically, you are traveling by a motor coach. So what happens is that you basically land in Rome. Every tour has a tour director assigned to them. That tour director stays with them the entire time. The tour director is really there to be a right-hand person for the group leader, who in this instance would be Ms. Gore. And their primary focus is to get the group from point A to point B, and to ensure that all of the EF safety measures are handled throughout the trip. So they're inspecting hotels whenever they check into a hotel. They're inspecting the motor coach before the students are getting on the motor coach. They're inspecting areas, things like that. So those are their two primary focuses. Throughout the trip, the other people that the students would encounter are local historians and local guides. So for instance, in a day in Rome, if they're going to the Vatican, which is on this trip, and having the opportunity to see St. Peter's Basilica and Vatican Square, then a Vatican guide would follow them and educate the students on what they're seeing. And that person would be with the group in addition to the tour director. So the tour director is always with the group. And even for our tours that change countries, you always maintain that same tour director so that there's continuity not only for the teachers to feel like they have that partner, but then also they develop really strong relationships with the students. And if there's students here who have traveled on EF tours before, I think they can tell you that the tour directors tend to be as much of the experience as often a lot of things that they see themselves. So.
Go ahead, Ms. Stock. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you. Can you just describe, you talked about some security protocols. Can you just describe what those typically are, and maybe and what they would specifically be on this trip?
Sure. So they're inspecting, for instance, when they check into a hotel, there are certain protocol that the tour director has to do. So they have to go through, they have to ensure that all the fire alarm systems are working. They have to ensure that the locks on the doors for the rooms are all working. They have to ensure that all fire exits are readily available, alarmed, and are not blocked. They have to ensure that, so all of our hotels have to have a front desk staff manned 24 hours a day, so they're checking that is actually what's going on at the hotel. And so in addition to that, our operations team, which is in Europe, visits all of our hotel locations regularly in addition and does additional point checks, but that's really every time a tour director enters a hotel. Those are the things they're checking for, and they're checking for those things nightly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stockman.
No, if I may.
Please, go ahead.
Since, to the best of your knowledge at least, since the Paris attacks, have there been any additional security protocols that your company has taken for any trip, regardless of location?
So I don't know necessarily that we have additional safety protocols. I think that any time you're in the business of people, and not only that, but you're in the business of children, you work in a company that has a heightened security protocol to begin with. And, I think as a company, and especially our tour directors who live in Europe, they're living this every day. And so I think that they're obviously walking around with a different perspective. But we're certainly having far more safety-related conversations, trainings, in addition to what they're normally trained on. What I can share with you is we actually did have groups in Paris when the Paris attacks happened. We not only had students there, we actually had a whole group of superintendents there who were in the city center when the attacks occurred. And from my perspective, being back here and just hearing the response and how quickly those groups were immediately moved out of the city, new hotels booked for them, hours outside of Paris, new arrangements made. It was really amazing just to see the entire protocol in action. And I think it's really the strength that we have 500 offices worldwide. And it's really the strength of the network and just our partners on the ground that enable us to react quickly.
Thank you.
Could we take a, if there's no objection, I'd like to take a 2-minute break.
Yes.
Thank you.
So moved. Excuse me.
I wrote it down just in case. I was going to crash it. That's nice. The kids in that program are so nice.
I'm sorry, everybody. I had a slight family emergency. It's all set now. I apologize for the recess.
Okay. Glad everything's okay. I appreciate everyone's patience. We can go back. I believe Mr. Hockman, are you all set? Any other comments? Yeah, I know Mr. Rosignol did. Any other questions or comments?
I'll have some, but I'll wait till Mr. Rosignol comes back.
Okay. It's up to you. Do you want to start now, or?
Mrs. Dunn, did you? You had your...
I had one.
Mrs. Dunn, why don't we go to you?
Just one more question. We know Mrs. Gore. Mrs. Gore is phenomenal. But how many other chaperones travel? I know, at different points you'll have people from your organization, but do you know offhand how many chaperones there are on that trip?
Sure. Traditionally, schools opt for a 6-to-1 teacher-to-student ratio, and I believe that was how this trip was planned.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go back to Mr. Rosignol.
Thank you.
Do you want to speak?
Through the chair. Thank you, Mr. Driscoll, for coming. That's okay. You said you're based out of Cambridge, correct?
Yes.
How many school districts do you currently service?
So we're a private company, so
Okay.
that's a little tricky. I can tell you that we have hundreds of trips in Massachusetts alone.
Abroad?
Yes. Yep.
Currently?
Yes.
And have any other school districts canceled any abroad trips?
Only one other school in Massachusetts has.
Where were they heading?
To be honest, I don't recall. It was a European destination, but I don't recall the countries.
And roughly the same time frame?
April vacation.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Olympio.
Typically, how many groups, I mean, are they broken out into groups when you're overseas as far as, the chaperones, or do you constantly stay in one group?
So you are primarily together. There is free time that's available to the group. However, it's up to the lead chaperone how they want to handle that. So some chaperones, depending on the country and where you are, normally what happens is the tour director, when there is free time, either has prearranged an activity with the lead chaperone based on maybe something additional that the group wanted to see, an extra museum they wanted to go into, so those types of things can be prearranged. Other groups, the students always want to shop, and so the tour director will take them to an area that's probably, similar to like a Faneuil Hall Marketplace type of thing, which is, fairly enclosed, easily be able to find somewhere for a good meeting point that has, food and different local novelties that the students can purchase. But the free time is really worked out between the lead chaperone and the tour director as to what the wishes of the group are. So there's, traditionally, some days there's no free time built in based on the itinerary, and then other days there may be, an hour or two built in for free time.
So free time is without chaperone, or?
So once again, it depends on the comfort of the chaperone. So, what I think we see more often than not is, one chaperone in a group says, hey, I'm going here, whoever wants to go to these shops, come with me. Another chaperone will say, I'm going to a museum, whichever students want to go to that museum, come with me, and they tend to sort of splinter off and do different activities. That tends to be the most common way that teachers structure free time.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Olympio. Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. Thank you for all the valuable information you've been providing. I want the committee to know, and I think you may already know because I revealed it before realizing it was a vote. My opinion on the matter was, and still is, that it should be a parental decision. That if you don't want your child to go on this trip to Italy, then don't send them. The trip is planned. It sounds like it's well-run and extremely safe. Can we say that we're safe anywhere in this world? No. We can't say we're safe sending our children to New York or Boston or all of the bomb threats that are coming to our schools. So if we approve field trips to go to Faneuil Hall or to see an opera or a play right here in our own, state, I see no difference in letting them go to Italy. If you don't want your child to go, then you don't have to send your child. If you'd like your child to still go, my opinion is that we should still let them have that opportunity, which is why we're here tonight.
Thank you. Mr. Rosignol?
Thank you. Through the chair. On that point, so you said there was 19 students currently going on this trip?
I believe it was 19 total, including the chaperones.
Okay. So, with what Ms. Carpenter said, a parental decision, if half decided not to go, would that then in turn change the price tag for the remaining students? And if so, how would that change?
No, it would not. So in this instance, the PBD group was slated to travel with actually a school from Maine. So they were traveling together. That school is still traveling. And they're traveling, so they have plenty of room to accommodate more students. So if as few as, Mrs. Gore and one student wanted to travel, they would travel with their original school in Maine.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Mrs. Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think that it is such a volatile world that we're bringing our children up into, and these decisions are very, very difficult. Under the current policy that we have, the superintendent followed the parameters that the school committee had set out as far as making a decision on whether the trip would go forward. I know we're going to discuss some new policy, and I think that that may help, but I do think the ultimate decision does rest with the parents, and hearing the information about the provisions for trip insurance and the student to chaperone ratio. Those things have all contributed to, you know, a great base of knowledge that we didn't have coming into this. But it also, you're a reputable company, you have a good track record. I do think at some point it is ultimately up to the parents as to whether they want to send their students on such a trip. And I also think, though, we do have to recognize that things happen very quickly in the world, and that if need be, we do need to be able to make decisions that may stop a trip. I know that when this decision was made, no one knew what was going to happen next. There's a terrorist threat in every corner of the globe, and it's constant. And I actually think at that time that it was a good decision, truthfully, to be able to stop and consider the safety of our students and staff. Every instance is going to be different, and timing is going to be different too. And I think that we need to keep an open mind on our policy and on the responsibilities of determining whether a trip is appropriate for students, and probably working in conjunction with parents as well, but to make sure that people understand it's a weighted decision on the department as to whether a trip can go forward or not, based on a lot of different factors. So.
Thank you. Mr. Amico?
Mr. Driscoll, thank you for coming tonight. I agree in a sense that, yes, it is the parents' decision if you want to send a kid or not, especially overseas. But with saying that, my concerns are definitely always safety of students, security, and as a board member, obviously liability and where that stands. So those are my concerns. But I do agree that parents should have a say, but safety, security, and liability are three buzzwords that we keep on hearing. Can't avoid those, so those are the things that concern me.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Driscoll. We do have public participation. I did want to afford anybody in the audience, a parent, student that would like to come up and speak. We technically allow for 3 minutes to anybody to come up, but certainly I want to afford that opportunity to anybody who would like to come up and speak on this topic to do so now. So anybody would like to come up, please come on up. Yeah, would you mind coming over here? Please welcome, and if you could just introduce yourself, your name and address, please.
I'm Alex Antonio, and I live in Central Peabody, 68 Franklin Street. Now, the major thing that can be said is that EF Tours always has provided irreplaceable educational experiences for every student. I have been on an EF Tour before. I went to the Germany trip my sophomore year, 2 years ago. It was a experience. It was incredible. And yes, even at that point, there were, of course, the inherent risks that come with every trip. But we take risks in everything that we do every day. I take risks going to school every day with all the threats that always constantly happen. And so I feel as though if the students and the parents have the time to make a careful and informed decision, then they should be allowed to make that decision, and that it should be solely their decision that it rests on.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Neary. If you could just introduce yourself, please.
Good evening. My name is Ted Neary. I live at 54 Linden Road, and I currently have my daughter is a senior who is participating on this trip. or was. A couple of things from this parent's point of view. November 13th, the Paris attacks happened. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Levine, the meeting was 2 weeks later, I believe. We were called to a meeting, all the parents and the students, to what I thought was to discuss the trip. And as it turned out, that decision was made before one parent walked into that room, okay? We had no say. Yes, Dr. Levine listened to us, but he already had his mind made up. Another thing to keep in mind, we purchased insurance for this trip. I'm out $550, so the insurance doesn't cover the entire nut. Keep that in mind. And not that I'm putting a price tag on safety, because I'm not. Ms. Gore, who teaches World War II, that Melissa had taken the class and was really excited about going, marching through Patton's trip. How cool is that if you're a student? Honest to God. I want to go on the trip, honestly. So understand the disappointment that, first of all, it was taken out of our hands. Done. We had no choice. So with that being said, from a parent standpoint, and I'm not gonna, I could go on all night. While Dr. Levine, I said that night, I didn't hate the decision because everybody was frenzied because it had just happened. I think it was way too premature, way too premature. And I don't think, there were some parents at that meeting that one gentleman actually said this was his third child to go on a trip that was canceled. I mean, I know you guys are discussing policy on this. Just keep that in mind. If there is a policy that we know about and you follow the rules, awesome. I just think it's a haphazard policy. If we were, that night, if we were said, hey, listen, I'm thinking about, we need to keep an eye on world events, what the State Department says, how their feelings are, we'll revisit this January, February. I think I can't speak for any other parents, but that would have been a lot more palatable because I get it. If things had ramped up, I wouldn't want Melissa going. I really wouldn't. That, I think she's missing out on an incredible opportunity. I really do. So, that's it.
Thank you, Mr. Neer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to come forward and speak? The microphone is open. Okay. Yeah, please. Welcome again. If you could please introduce yourself. Full name and address, please.
I'm Josephine Pagliuca. I live on 5 Nancy Avenue. I have one major point to put across. When I signed up for this trip back in June, I knew what I was up against. Remind you, last year there were terrorist attacks that had occurred. Charlie Hebdo, I'm sure you all remember Charlie Hebdo. That happened in Paris. And my parents and I knew going into this, signing up, putting our names on the forms, putting the check in, the deposit, that I was signing up for this. And I was totally okay with that, knowing who I was going to be with and the odds. I based it on the odds. And I know that's kind of a not really firm thing to base your decision on, but I know Miss Gore and EF Tours, and I trusted them. And I knew taking this trip was the odds of me finding myself in the midst of a terrorist attack is the same odds as me walking into school, walking into the North Shore Mall, going to Faneuil Hall, going to a Red Sox game. It's the same, going to a Trump rally in Bernie Sanders. It's the same odds. So,
that was good.
But besides that all, I do feel the decision should be based on the parents. Perhaps the vote, get 50-50. If more than half of the parents vote against it, you're free to cancel the trip. But however, most of the parents do vote for it. We should be allowed to go on this trip, to attend the experience, because I've gone to Italy a few times. I really don't mind not missing it. But the whole point of this trip was to see the World War II history behind it. That's what I've missed out on. And that's why I chose this trip.
Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to come forward? Okay, Mrs. Dunn, did you want to comment?
Yes, actually, this is a follow-up to one of my questions. I had heard from people, you know, that because of the timing and everything, that they were going to be out of their deposit, which was really why I was asking the questions, not only about the insurance, but also about refunds. And the peace of mind policy, when you spoke, if I may, through you to Mrs. Driscoll, when I asked about that, the peace of mind policy takes effect up to 45 days before. Wouldn't that have protected the parents from our cancellation of the trip? Would they be getting, they wouldn't be getting their money back?
So the peace of mind policy covers the tour to make changes. So you can change your destination, you can change your dates, and you can change your itinerary. So those are what is covered under peace of mind. After the Paris attacks occurred, we basically made the decision as a company, because we had groups going to Paris as soon as 6 days after the Paris attacks had occurred. We had groups that were scheduled to be there over Thanksgiving. And so what we did was, knowing that there would likely be conversations at schools and school committee meetings, we at that time made the decision to freeze all of our cancellation fees. So as you get closer to a trip, the cancellation fees increase because things like airlines have been fully non-refundably booked, hotels have been secured, etc. So what we made the decision to do was freeze the cancellation fees through December 31st to allow these types of conversations to happen with families and to make decisions. And what we also know, having lived through Charlie Hebdo, having lived through volcanic ash from Iceland and tsunamis in Japan. I mean, world events happen, whether they're natural disasters or terrorism attacks that affect a group's decision whether or not to travel. That we also just wanted to ensure that everybody felt comfortable, and we know that oftentimes decisions are made quickly in the aftermath that are sometimes then rediscussed at a later point in time, and felt that by freezing the cancellation fees for a group that they could take time and really see how things settled in Paris and what sort of the days after were that were following.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or questions? I know Dr. Levine would like to speak. Okay. Dr. Levine?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'm sorry, through the chair, if there's no other further questions from Ms. Driscoll, should she step down?
Yeah, Mr. Driscoll.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much.
So, Ms. Driscoll, I'd like to welcome you here tonight as well. I would have liked to have known that you were going to come and represent EF before tonight, but I did not know that you would be here. I think that everything you said is accurate in representing your company. The decision that I made had nothing to do with the quality of EF education, nor really did it have anything to do with whether or not something might happen when these kids are over in Europe. A decision was made by me that it doesn't make any sense to me for a school system to sponsor a trip of 20-some-odd American kids to Europe at this particular time, period. So I didn't invite EF Education to the parent meeting because there was nothing that they could have said that would have changed my mind. And it's absolutely true, Ted, that my mind was made up walking into that meeting. And there was nothing that you could have said that would have changed my mind. I gave you and afforded you I'm not going to dialogue with you, but I did afford you the opportunity as parents to come and talk to me about a number of other issues, one of which was whether or not an alternative trip could be scheduled. I was on the phone with EF Education at least 5 or 6 different times, exploring alternative opportunities. Ms. Gore came up with a trip to the Grand Canyon and other American landmarks in that area, and there was very little interest by the group to go on that trip. And we needed a minimum number of students to be able to go. The trip cost would have been significantly less and money would not have been lost. I think it's a mistake for a school system at this particular time to be sponsoring. There's a difference between parents having a right to make a final decision about whether or not their children go to Europe and school systems sponsoring a trip to Europe. I think that's bad policy, my opinion. And my opinion up until this particular moment is the only one that counts, because the decision to make such a choice was vested in me by this school committee as policy and procedure. However, I have a policy that I have drafted if the school committee chooses to change its policy. And it's very simple. It reads, but by the way, this is a 2-step process I would suggest to you as a school committee. The first step would be to adopt a new policy, therefore clearly giving you the authority to make final decisions on all overnight trips. The second discussion would be, once you have given yourselves that right, which absolutely is correct and is the right of the school committee. And I would suggest to you that many school committees in the state of Massachusetts have that final authority. I would say it's rather unusual for a superintendent to have the final authority, quite frankly. I have no problem with you adopting the following policy. It is the policy of the Peabody School Committee that, after appropriate approvals from the school principal and superintendent of schools, all overnight trips will be reviewed and approved also by the school committee. This policy applies to in-state, out-of-state, and out-of-country field trips sponsored in any way by the Peabody Public School System. Once you have adopted that policy, if you choose to do so, a second discussion would take place then appropriately to overrule the superintendent's decision. If you overrule the superintendent's decision to cancel the Italy trip, I will work at your direction as quickly and as best I can to make the Italy trip happen. I don't know the answer to whether or not it can. You may know the answer to whether or not it can, but I know it's on short notice. But I have already emailed, knowing that this was on the agenda, because I put it on the agenda, and knowing this policy would be discussed because I wrote the policy, I have already called Ms. Gore and asked her to begin exploring whether or not the trip to Italy could take place. I don't know the answer to that right now. And that's where we are. Nothing that is said here tonight or could be said here tonight would ever change my mind about the way I feel about American kids going to Europe and being on the ground, period. ISIS doesn't call us and let us know when they're going to attack. And they don't go away. They're there. They're here. You talked about odds. I think the odds are much better in America of not being attacked than in Europe. It's just the way I feel. I mean, we could go all the way and talk about Jerusalem. Would you let your kids go to Jerusalem right now? So I feel that it's too dangerous for American kids to be in a group in Europe at this particular time. I think a lot more things have to happen security-wise in order to guarantee to the best of our ability the protection of American kids overseas. And with all due respect to EF Education, they are, as you honestly said, a private company for profit. They do the best that they can, and they have a very good reputation. They are not a security company. And I am not interested in putting the lives of our kids from this public school system in anybody's hands in Europe. I will say one more thing. Parents, you have the right to send your kids to Europe. You just don't have the right to demand that a school system sponsor it. Thank you.
Okay. Committee members, any thoughts or comments? Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. Through the chair, Dr. Levine, I just want you to know that I appreciate and I respect your passion for the issue. I completely understand why you have that opinion, and I thank you for that opinion, and I thank you for the decision that you made, because I respect it. I also respect the other position of letting it be our decision when it comes to field trips, and then ultimately letting the parents decide on their child's trip. With that being said, I'd like to start the first motion that I'd like to thank Dr. Levine for writing to change our policy to, in regards to field trips, exactly as it is written and has been said. It is the policy of the Peabody School Committee that after appropriate approvals from the school principal and superintendent of schools, all overnight trips will be reviewed and approved also by the school committee. This policy applies to in-state, out-of-state, and out-of-country field trips sponsored in any way by the Peabody Public School System. That is a motion.
Second for discussion.
Further motion by Mrs. Carpenter, seconded for discussion by Mr. Rossignol. Comments? Mr. Rossignol?
Thank you. Through the chair to Dr. Levine. Thank you. Your heart's always in the right place as far as students and their safety. Whether we as a board agree or disagree, you made the best decision with the right intentions in mind. So I thank you for that. And I think that's one of the reasons why up until now, we've left that decision up to the superintendent, because I think we've always felt that the superintendent has the best needs of the students as well as our district in hand. I'm torn, to be perfectly honest with you. On one hand, you're absolutely right. Our students' safety is paramount. But you also don't want to live in fear. Now, where the line in the sand is, I think that's up to really the debate. Some people might argue that you're just as apt to have a terrorist attack in New York as you are in Italy. I think the one difference, at least in my mind, is in New York, they're a lot closer, a lot safer. Communication can happen instantaneously. Anything overseas is a lot more red tape, difficulty, and uncertainty. So, at least in my mind, that's my line in the sand. So I do appreciate, and I will vote for the new policy language. I just don't know if I will support the Italy trip moving forward.
Mrs. Dunn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Levine, I want to thank you for providing your insight into how you made that decision, because I think that the distinction that you made about a school system sponsoring a trip as opposed to parents allowing their students to go on a trip is a very important one. People boil it down into, well, you know, it's up to the parents. But it is also up to the school system as far as the sponsorship of a trip, because we're giving our imprimatur that it is okay to go. And I think that trying to make sure that people understand that that's a weighty decision on a school system sponsoring a trip. You know, sending staff with our students under the name of, you know, the Peabody Veterans Memorial High School trip, or whichever school is going on a trip, that is a very, very big decision and a very big responsibility. So I'm glad you spoke on that. I had one other point I was going to ask about in that policy. I would like to see, if we, you know, if this does pass, I would like to see something there stating that parents parents are encouraged to purchase trip insurance for said trip. I know for something as expensive as an overseas trip, people probably all purchase trip insurance, but I don't know. They don't have to. And we have had instances of people who have purchased trips, paid towards trips, and then the student couldn't go. And people have come to the school department looking for reimbursement, depending upon different reasons. And I think that we need to put that back on people. If people are going to take a trip that's costing them money, that the onus is on them to get trip insurance to reimburse them for funds. That this school department is not going to reimburse people for funds that have been incurred, or, I'm sorry, the costs that have been incurred on a trip, that it is their responsibility to get the insurance.
Okay. Mrs. Carpenter, then Mr. Miko.
Thank you. Just to point to some of the pieces that Mrs. Dunn spoke about in regards to the distinction of a school-sponsored trip and a parental decision to go to Italy. I'd just like to point out that a lot of times, if you would say that distinction is, well, then why don't you just go to Italy? There's probably no way a family could afford, you know, a family of 5 or 6 or, you know, even 3, the 2 parents, for everybody to go. So the opportunity to have an educational leader who can give you the knowledge, Patton's route, and explain everything, the educational value of that, and the cost of only having to afford to send the one child probably makes a huge difference. And the staff that are attending want to go. They don't have to go either. That would be their decision as well. But that's where I see when somebody says, well, why don't they just go on their own? Sometimes that just might not be feasible. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miko?
Thank
And
you.
then Mr. Olympio.
Dr. Levine, as an educator, you've used the educator's mantra of students first, and above even education of a student, you're putting safety first. And as an educator myself, that's the most important thing, even before educating a student. Again, as others have said, the term school sponsorship, that worries me in a sense of liability, and to have to look at a parent if something does happen overseas. That is something that concerns me. And obviously, as a parent myself, I want to make decisions for my student, for my own children, and as you do. But from a school committee, from a school member's standpoint here, that whole school sponsorship issue and the liability and the that impact of guilt if something did happen really tears me on this one. This is a tough one.
Thank you. Mr. Olympio?
Through the chair, Dr. Levine, I appreciate your passion and your position on this, but I feel like the world is never going to be the same. And I can't get over the fact that it really, at the end of the day, I feel like it is a parental decision. You know, liability, I think the liability has always been there. It's been there for probably the past 20, 30, 40 years with these trips. God forbid there was a terrorist attack or something of that nature. I mean, I don't see how. I think parents and the students are well aware of those risks. And at the end of the day, I just can't see a district being held accountable for something like that.
Thank you. Mrs. Dunn?
I'm going to ask people to step back for 1 second. Right now, we're talking about the trip to Italy. We're talking about a trip overseas. But this policy will apply to all overnight and out-of-state trips. And one of the trips that we sponsor every year is the Higgins trip to New York. And in some respects, that trip is a very difficult trip for people. For some, it's difficult to let their child go on that trip. For others, the cost is prohibitive. But one of the goals of that trip is to have a shared experience of all the students in the 8th grade at the Higgins. And in one respect, that's very different than this trip. This trip is limited to students, a very finite group of students who are interested in a very specific study at the high school, and it's a great opportunity for them. The Higgins trip is designed with the hope that the entire 8th grade can go on that trip. And if you look at the differences between those, it's, in one way, it's easy to look at the small trip to Europe, but we also have a very big trip to New York City, and that in itself is truly, in my mind, that's a bigger example of a school-sponsored trip where we have hundreds of students going on a trip, and that in itself is a big decision of whether to send them there. So I think if you could just look at those two and realize that this policy is not only about this one targeted trip at the high school level, this applies to every trip that we have in our district.
Mr. Hockman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Dr. Levine. In drafting the proposed policy that's before us tonight, what, if any, research did you do relative to school committee policies anywhere else in the region or in the Commonwealth?
I did none, but I've been in enough places. I've never been in a place, quite frankly, where the superintendent had the ultimate authority to make this decision on overnight trips. It's always been the superintendent's decision to be able to approve, without school committee approval, field trips that do not involve overnight. They could be out of state, but not overnight, for example. Trips to water parks or in New Hampshire, coming back the same day, have always been a superintendent's decision. But this is an anomaly, quite frankly, that school committees generally do not relinquish the right to do final approval on overnight trips. That is why I have absolutely no problem if you decide to pass this policy. It would be typical of school committees, not atypical. The second part of it, I will certainly have a problem with, and if you override my decision to allow the Italy trip, I will make a very strong statement to be put into the record. But I will then do everything that I can to make that trip happen.
So as recently as yesterday, Dr. Levine, we've agreed that we disagree at times, but we do it respectfully and with civility. I'm not a big fan of the language that's written on this paper. It goes beyond what you're saying is typical of other school committees in terms of authority for overnight trips. The policy that's before us now applies to in-state, out-of-state, out-of-country field trips sponsored in any way by the Peabody Public School System. So if I can, through you, Mr. Mayor, to Ms. Carpenter, have you had the opportunity to review any policies from any school committees or school districts in the region and what their policy would be on this issue?
No, I did review the MASC position on this, and it was just basically to take no action on the field trip, to let it go. I don't have a problem if this is the general language that we agree on. It's about overnight trips, so it wouldn't be we wouldn't have every single field trip coming before us, daytime type of issues. Is there other language you'd like to see in it or taken out of it?
Well, the way it's written, it seems that we can approve these field trips, but it doesn't talk about our disapproval of these field trips. It says that we can review and approve. So just as it's written, I'm concerned that it doesn't give us the authority that I think you're seeking. And no offense, Dr. Levine, I just reading it, getting it for the first time and trying to dissect what it says, and I'm not quite sure that it satisfies the concerns that Ms. Carpenter
If I may,
raised.
through the mayor, because I just need to correct one thing. I may have misspoken. What you have in front of you is very typical of school committee policy throughout the Commonwealth. And it doesn't go anywhere beyond what is typically given to school committees, which is any overnight trip regardless of where it's going. I can certainly put a slash, approve, disapprove, and add that to the policy. I have no problem with that.
I'll yield to Ms.
You all
Carpenter.
set?
Just to the point, I would interpret it to mean we can approve it if it had been if it wasn't approved already by the principal and the superintendent, kind of like in a situation that we're in now. That's the way I would interpret it. But we could put a slash and just do disapprove and approve.
I think the way I read it, if I may, Mr. Mayor,
Yes,
the way I read it is that after appropriate approvals from the school principal and superintendent of schools, then we get to review and approve. So I think that in the situation that we have, and I'm not speaking about the Italy trip specifically yet, but if I could use that as an example, the way I read this is if Dr. Levine disapproves this trip, we don't get an opportunity to then approve it.
Through the chair. You could interpret it that way. That's not the way I would intend it. My intention would be that if I disapproved under this policy of the Italy trip and said no, let's say the principal sent it to me and then I said no, that the same group of parents and students would have the right to appeal that decision to the school committee under this policy because you have the right of final approval or disapproval.
And in fact, there would be no need for it to come to our level if the school principal and superintendent approve the trip.
So do we want to just take out appropriate approvals and put in recommendations? There's a policy of the Peabody School Committee that after recommendations from the school principal and superintendent of schools, final decision authority would go to the school committee.
I'll yield and think.
To that point, though, on that subject, then that would mean if we leave the language the way it is, we don't have to worry about something not getting across our desk in time. We only would have to see it as if there was a problem, if they didn't approve it. Other than that, they're all approved, everything's fine. If you don't hear anything about it, then we're all good.
That's the way it was intended, through the chair.
That's the way I'm reading it.
So then we would, if I may.
Yeah, please.
So then we would have no authority if we disagreed with the superintendent on a trip that he approved?
I would say if you bring it to the meeting, then we could, I mean, there's some type of authority there.
Through the chair, to clarify that question, and it's a really good question. I mean, we could massage the language, but the intention is that once I approved it, let's say Mr. Buckley approved the trip and I approved the trip, I would then put it in your package for review.
As we currently do.
As we currently do.
Yeah.
And then but under this policy, you would have the authority to change that decision one way or the other upon reviewing it, by bringing it to the table at the next meeting. That's the intention.
And if I may.
Yep, Mr. Hockman, you still have the floor.
And while I appreciate the intention, and I suspected that was the intention, I'm not, words do matter, and this is a policy, and we need to, I think, get it right to the best of our ability if we can. To Ms. Carpenter, through you, Mr. Mayor, there are times where trips come up, overnight trips, and the staff members don't submit paperwork in a timely manner. Are you suggesting that we reconvene as a committee in those circumstances, that we review those field trips?
No, and that's why I would encourage this language so that we don't have to approve every single field trip. It's basically only if there's an issue like there is right now. We would have the authority, if need be, to discuss it and vote on it.
So to that point, and I don't disagree with what we're attempting to do here, if we could throw a may in there somehow,
okay.
so that it gives us a little bit of discretion as far as there are going to be circumstances where, for reasons that are unfortunate and unintentional, that a field trip requests are going to be submitted not in the most timely manner due to nobody's fault, and I don't know that in the normal course we would need to necessarily review all that, and I don't want to necessarily hamper or hamstring anyone's opportunity to take those overnight trips. And I don't think Ms. Carpenter does either. So I just think there's some...
So instead of will on the second line, you're suggesting we use may to give the school committee that ability should they desire?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Rossignol on that?
Through the chair, my one fear with that one word being changed, not Dr. Levine, not future superintendents, but they could circumvent the board's authority by withholding something that may be controversial, pushing it through with the word may as opposed to will.
I think, if I may, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I think it was, you looked at me, so I assume you were talking.
Well.
Yeah. I think may gives us the authority both to act or not act at our discretion, as a committee's discretion. And secondly, I think if a superintendent were to be as unscrupulous as that, it would be, he or she would be subject to some sort of disciplinary action.
Okay.
And I don't think Dr. Levine would ever be that unscrupulous.
I'll amend the motion to take out will to may.
Okay. I do think that fits the intent of what at least the discussion that I think is taking place, what the intent of your motion is, Ms. Carpenter. So we do have you did second it for discussion.
Yep.
Is there a second for a vote?
Second for a vote with just one other language clarification. Should we put disapprove and approve?
And recommendation in a place of appropriate approvals.
So approve/disapprove.
Just for clarification purposes.
To be reviewed and approved and disapproved?
/disapprove.
/ disapproved.
On the motion, Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
Are we voting on this as by way of a first reading?
Yes, change in policy would require that, right, Mrs. Dunn?
First reading.
Yes.
I'll amend my motion to include /disapprove where appropriate.
Okay.
Second.
Everybody understand where we are with the language? Okay. Seconded by Mr. Rossignol. No further comments. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Rossignol?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Limpio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Through the chair,
Yes.
before you make your next motion, may I suggest that because this is a first reading and is not yet a policy, that a motion needs to take place before you vote on the Italy trip, my decision on the Italy trip, to make an exception to your own policy and procedure and allow this vote to take place as if this were policy, because otherwise you'd be violating your own policy.
Mr. Hockman.
Slightly out of the norm and character of this committee, would you permit me to either invite Ms. Driscoll back up here or ask her a question from the stage? I'm concerned about the timing of this trip and whether or not we need to act on this tonight in order for the kids to, in fact...
Yeah, I'd like
be
to ask that question.
eligible for the trip.
Mrs. Driscoll, would you come up real quick? Sorry to make you run up again. Did you catch that question? I think we just kind of maybe want to get a sense of if the school committee was inclined to vote to approve the trip, is it even a possibility still?
Yep, so at this stage, the biggest question mark is the flight space. And what we have been able to confirm as of yesterday, and obviously it's fluid with airline bookings, is that we could secure enough seats for the original group, knowing that maybe not everyone will still choose to attend, but We looked into the largest number possible. We were able to definitely confirm seats out of New York City for the group. So about 50% of our Massachusetts schools actually travel out of New York City during April vacation because there's very limited flight availability out of Logan. And it also just affords traditionally better itineraries to Europe and many more flights per day if there's ever delays and those types of things to get students out. What we don't have a clear indication of yet is whether or not we could get the entire group on one flight out of Logan, which would be our preference. And at this time, we didn't have a firm commitment from an airline that they could allot us the correct number of seats for the group. So obviously, if there's a change in the overall size of the group, then Logan does become a more feasible issue, a more feasible option, but at this stage, they couldn't 100% confirm the original group fully out of Logan. And in the instances where we do have groups that fly out of New York, we bus the group down from the school to New York.
Okay, thank you. I did want to ask that one question.
Through-
I appreciate
through-
it.
Through the chair.
Dr. Levine?
While you're here, one of my gravest concerns is having no control over flights emanating from Europe, beginning from Europe, and coming back to the United States. Is that same issue a problem coming home if you get the kids there, or would this be round-trip transportation that would be booked at the beginning and parents would know that how these kids were getting home?
Oh, yeah, so all of our flights are round-trip transportation, and all flight itineraries are released to the families prior to departure.
Okay. Thank you. Quick question, please.
Yeah,
Yep.
thank you. So, through you, Mr. Mayor, if this trip were to take place and flights would originate in Kennedy, in New York, would there be the opportunity to fly from Rome to Boston?
On the way home? Yeah, possibly. So we were primarily looking, it's more the outbound that tends to be the challenge during April vacation for Massachusetts than the return. So that was our first priority.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Driscoll. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so, Mrs. Carpenter?
I have another motion. Move to suspend school committee policy regarding second reading on said field trip policy.
Second.
Further motion by Mrs. Carpenter, seconded by Mr. Olympio. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hoffman?
No.
Mr. Rozignol?
Yes.
Ms. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
No.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Okay, Mrs. Carpenter?
I have another motion. I'd like to make a motion to overrule the superintendent's decision and allow Mrs. Gore's class to attend the Italy field trip.
Second.
Okay, so the motion is to overrule, so a yes vote is to overrule, and no vote would be to sustain the decision by Dr. Levine. Okay? Roll call vote?
Mr. Hoffman?
On the motion, Mr. Mayor, if I may.
Yes.
Boy, this isn't as easy as it appears. I understand the rationale that Dr. Levine used and explained in making his decision regarding this trip. I understand the parents and students are dissatisfied with that decision. It's not often as a school committee we're asked to at least publicly overturn the decision of our chief executive, with whom we entrust over 6,000 students, over 1,000 staff members, soon to be over $70 million budget. And that's frankly a difficult position for us to be in, I think. So, could we perhaps take a brief recess so that we can, I can at least consider this a little longer. This is a.
I'm willing to give some time, Mr. Hockman, but I want to stay in our seats, but I understand this is a decision that requires some thought, so I'm willing to, give you a two, yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, may I say 1 minute, one more thing, since Mr. Hockman brought it up? I want to make it clear that not all parents opposed my decision. They just didn't oppose it publicly. They just didn't agree with it publicly.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hockman?
If I can continue before I make my vote.
Yep.
So, just in the 30 seconds I've taken, and I appreciate the chair's courtesy in that regard, to consider my vote. It still is going to be a decision that parents are going to ultimately make, regardless of what we choose. If we permit and overrule the superintendent, and it's still going to fall in the laps of the parents to make the decision as to what's best for their children. And I understand that there's risk associated with this, and I appreciate Mr. Olympio's point, and that risk always is present, and Ms. Antonius's point to that effect as well. Respectfully, Dr. Levine, and like I said earlier, we do disagree at times. We do it respectfully and with dignity and courtesy that's always present. I will vote yes.
No.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Mika?
No.
Okay. Dr. Levine, do you want to make a comment? Or?
I would offer an alternative to that Trump rally. Yes, so I certainly respect the decision of the school committee. I respect every member of this school committee that sits here and makes very difficult decisions like this, and I appreciate the time that you gave to discussing, debating, and internalizing what had to be a very difficult decision for you, because I know you love me. So, all that said, I would like it written into the record that I strongly disapprove and disagree with the decision of the school committee to allow the trip to Italy. That being said, I will begin tomorrow to do the best that I can to help Mrs. Gore put together this trip once again. We will speak to EF Education, and Mrs. Gore will do most of the work through this, but whatever it is that she needs from this office as a directive by this school committee, I will support.
Okay. Well, thank you for your time and attention. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Next item, I believe we would like to bring up Sharon Cameron, yes, and Brenda as well, yes. Espert and Narcan. Is there another chair over there? Welcome, Sharon, Brenda. I know you have a presentation to make. Do you want to jump right into it, Dr. Levine?
working in partnership with Sharon and Brenda for public policy on health and safety matters has been a tremendous advantage for our school system. Sharon particularly, I work very closely with on a number of issues. Much unlike Mr. Hockman, we do agree most of the time, Sharon and I. And Sharon is bringing forth 2 initiatives that I strongly support. And I thank you for, I apologize that it took so long for us to get through that issue. Thank you for waiting, thank you for being here, and I'll turn the floor over to Sharon.
Thank you, and no problem, we'll sleep in tomorrow, that's okay in there, right? We're going to start off with a discussion of the proposal to bring naloxone, which is the generic name for Narcan, into the schools, and actually I'm going to have our new school nurse leader, Brenda, lead the discussion on that one.
So just to back up a little bit in regards to naloxone and how it came to be in the school systems, the Mass Department of Public Health launched the overdose education and naloxone distribution back in August of 2007. And since then, all the communities throughout the Commonwealth have been increasing access. First, it started with many of the first responders, the police department, the fire department, and then have continued to roll it out into school clinics. I attended a regional nurse leader meeting last week, and there are currently over 133 communities that have it in their school nurses' offices. And just before I begin getting into the actual topic of the naloxone, I just want to be clear that this is specifically just for the nurses. We will not be training any other administrator or any other staff members in the building to administer the naloxone. And again, one other valid point to make is that it's nasally it's not an injectable, it's nasal. It's just like a nasal spray with medicine that goes into your nasal cavity. Just another point to make is, what are opioids? There are several different types of opioids out on the market. That there's street opioids such as heroin, and then you have prescription opioids such as morphine, Demerol, codeine, Percocet, and OxyContin. So those are, you think they're safe because they're being prescribed by a physician, when indeed some of these people that are taking them, they're taking in large quantities, and every day they're looking for more. Their body has to get more of it to get that high. Opioids are medications that actually relieve pain, and they dull your senses. And as a result, they last long in the body depending on the type of opioid that it is, the strength, and the dose. An overdose occurs when the body has too much of this medication in the body, and it has a decreased stimulation as well as unresponsiveness. So through clinical assessment, the nurses, will make that assessment whether or not the Narcan is to be delivered. And with that being said, they have a complete set of assessment skills that they would then therefore look for. The lack of oxygen that is provided once these opioids sit on the receptors in the brain will be developed with the, the blue lips or the, your blue fingertips. So there's very specific things that the nurses will be looking for, and I will be doing a training with them actually next week. I was trained through the Department of Public Health, and I then therefore now am certified and able to train the nurses. So I'll be doing that with a staff meeting next week with them. There is also the imperative protocol that will be in place that 911 has to be called. So as soon as you feel that somebody is an overdose, 911's called. You're first attempting to do any type of rescue breathing on the victim, and if that is not, if they're or doing stimulation, and if they don't respond to either of those, then you're going to administer that naloxone. Naloxone works very quickly. It can work immediately, and then it can work up to 8 minutes after receiving the medication. They can have some withdrawal symptoms. The victim can just exhibit some withdrawal symptoms after receiving the naloxone, but for the most part, they just come out of that high and their breathing returns. There is no problem by giving the naloxone if it's not needed. It only responds to opioids. It does not respond to like benzodiazepines. If you have a mix of combination of different drugs, the opioids will react to the naloxone. So although you might not get them completely out of the high, they will return with their breathing, which is indeed a life-saving measure. So we're just hoping to keep it in as just another emergency medication that we hope that we will never have to use in our schools. And it's just, we'd rather be proactive than reactive.
And if I could add to that, what we are proposing is to provide this medication as an emergency medication in all schools throughout the district. And the reason we're suggesting that is not because we have had overdoses among students or staff in the schools that we actually needed it. It's part of a comprehensive community approach to increase the availability of naloxone throughout the community. Our police, fire, and ambulance have recently started carrying it. The police department have already had several saves, and we all know all of our school buildings are in use constantly by members of the community. So it's really just to have that there as an emergency medication in the event that any member of the community would need to be administered.
Any comments or questions on Narcan? Mr. Rossignol.
Thank you. Through the chair, thank you very much, ladies, for coming and bringing this to our attention. You already said it, but I want to kind of stress this point. There is no adverse effects from giving Narcan, naloxone, to somebody that is thought to be having an opioid reaction, but not.
Correct.
Okay. How long do you think you'll be finished with your training of the nursing staff for this to be up and running in our schools?
It's a one-day training, and if we move forward tonight, we have developed a policy and procedure, and the city physician, Dr. Chin, has already expressed her support for the program, and we would get a prescription prescribed through her.
And the Board of Health will be reviewing it and voting on it this coming Thursday.
Perfect. And this would be in all schools?
Yes.
And the shelf life of Narcan or naloxone, is there a shelf life? Does it have an expiration date?
It does.
And
it's
how
it's
long?
a year.
It's a year.
Mhm.
And I'm sorry, through the chair, I don't mean to be directing my questions directly to you, but
No, please, that's...
will the health department and the nursing be replenishing that supply as needed?
Yes.
Awesome. There was just something in the paper yesterday that I think it was a 18, 20-year-old unresponsive driving, and what woke him up was Narcan. So, I mean, unfortunately, opiates are very prevalent in our society, whether it's student, whether it's somebody picking up a student. So I like the fact that it's going to be in all of our schools as a safety net for the population safety. So I can't thank you enough for bringing this to our attention. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Hockman?
Thank you. Through you to Ms. Wolf, I guess. You said that the you're going to be training the nurses in the school buildings. And is the Narcan going to be stored in the nurse's office within it?
It will be. It'll be in a secure, unlocked location in the nurse's office.
A secure, unlocked
Correct.
location. And is there any thought as to why training is only for the nurses, or do you anticipate expanding that to staff members within schools as well?
There's a bit of a clinical assessment that comes along with the Narcan administration. I can't really speak to further on down the road. I think right now, most of the communities are just specifically stating just to keep it within the nurse's responsibility.
If I could, the city has an opiate overdose working group, and we have representation from many city departments. And one of the issues we're looking at is doing some community trainings for community members to be trained for this. And in fact, many family members of people who have addiction issues are trained and are carrying this medication. So, it's a little bit different than, I think sometimes people envision, are you going to have this stalked on the wall near an AED type of thing? I don't envision that we would be proposing that. We're proposing is the medication be available in the nurse's office, but it is likely that you'll see our opiate working group promote some community trainings to train people to, they may be carrying it with them if they have a family member or a loved one they're concerned about.
So thank you for your responses. I'm all in favor of this. I think this is a fantastic policy. I thank you for bringing it forward to us. I think it's, in my opinion, just putting our toe in the pool. I'd like to see us go in full body at some point, and it may not be that time, but our schools are used day and night, and they're used a considerable amount of time when there's no nursing staff in the building because of just logistics. I think it's as Mr. Rossignol reiterated and Ms. Wolf said, there is no negative side effect that we're aware of at this point for an administration of a dose of this medication, and we all read on a daily basis the positive attributes of an administration of a dose of this medication. So I'm in favor of I haven't seen the policy, but I'm in favor of the concept of what is being brought to us tonight, but I'd also like to revisit this perhaps, whether it be 6 months from now or a year from now, so that we can maybe expand upon this and maybe go through some training. I know with our recent policy changes, we've provided professional development for staff members with the administration of EpiPens. And I think that this this type of training can coincide with that training. And I realize that there's some protocols that are required and observations that need to be made. But I think that our staff is sophisticated enough to handle it.
Thank you. Mrs. Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mrs. Wolf and Mrs. Cameron, when you explained that someone would be given a dose of Narcan and that on 911 it's mandatory that that be called, does that mean that the person will be transported to a hospital, or I mean, it is like a miraculous recovery. They're not going to be sent back to class or anything like that?
Absolutely, they will be transported to a facility.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Miko?
Thank you, ladies, for coming. I appreciate it. I love it. I love the fact that it's in all schools, especially in elementary, just in case of an accidental overdose. I think we saw something out in Worcester, a tragic event recently, and I just want to thank you for bringing this, and I absolutely love it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. I hate the fact that we have to have it. I appreciate the work that you've done to put it in our schools. I just have a curiosity question. How many other districts do a lot of other schools have this already, or are we the first, are we the last,
No,
we're in the middle?
Not. I'd say we're probably close to half at this point. Like I said, when I referenced the regional nurse leader meeting, earlier in the fall, they had sent out a Survey Monkey, and there was 406 communities surveyed, and out of that, there was probably close to 180 at that point in time. That was back in October, that had already had it in their system and had it for quite some time. And the majority of the regional nurse leaders are currently proposing to bring it into their school clinics at this point in time. So
Great.
we are definitely, looking at that 50 percentile. We're in that area.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Olympio?
Through the chair?
Yep.
Just, I'm fully behind the concept, and I appreciate you coming here and educating us on this matter.
Thank you.
So do we need individual votes? Why don't we do an individual vote for Narcan,
Approval of Narcans.
naloxone? Yep, naloxone.
I make a motion to follow the recommendation of our health leader, Ms. Sharon Cameron, and our nurse liaison, Ms. Brenda Wolf.
Second.
Okay, you've heard the motion by Mr. Rossignol, seconded by Mrs. Dunn. On the motion,
Yeah, just clarification. So we're voting on the,
to allow
to allow
Narcan.
Narcan to be on site, but
And administered by our nurse as the
without,
see fit.
without a policy?
I'm sorry.
On the motion, Mr. Rossignol?
Yes, through the chair, this will be part of the nursing policy. So our role is to allow this to be done in our schools. They're the ones that are going to set up the policy with the doctor's input. And if you ever saw the nursing
No.
policy book, it's
I do understand that, but I don't know how this is different from the EpiPen conversation that we recently went through, and we also adopted a policy of our own in collaboration with the Department of Health and the nurses and so on.
Mrs. Carpenter?
I could clarify that the nurses aren't under our, we don't hire them, they're under the health, the health department. So when you look through our policy manual, it refers to their policy manual. They're not our employees, so we don't write policy for the school nurses.
Okay. Mr. Rossignol? Yep.
Through the chair, Ms. Wolf, that is the policy right there.
I have a copy of the policy.
So motion to receive, just so the board may have a copy of it.
Okay, second.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's fine.
So motion's been made to receive
And seconded.
by Mr. Rossignol, seconded by Mrs. Carpenter, but on the motion, Mrs. Dunn, I wanted to...
That is a policy of the Public Health Office. It's not our policy. This is a medication not unlike any other medication that the nurse's office would distribute to someone. An additional difference is with the EpiPen. The EpiPens were going to be administered by our staff, and they were going to be in the EpiPen cabinets, which were accessible by many different people who needed to be trained. But it is different because of the fact that and Mrs. Wolf, you explained it beautifully, that you have to do an assessment prior to administering the Narcan. An EpiPen, the people who are going to be giving an EpiPen is if you already know the person has an allergy, which may be known to our staff, or should be known to our staff, or that someone is complaining of the symptoms of an allergic reaction. So it is different than the administration of the Narcan.
So then we could move to receive and adopt this evening. Correct, Mrs. Dunn. I a lot of times defer to you on this, but my understanding would be because it's a policy of the Department of Public Health, then we would just move to receive and adopt.
Actually, we're going to be putting forth a policy to integrate the nursing policy as part of our policies. And our policy manual does not specifically address it at the moment, but it refers to it in different places. So we had spoken, the subcommittee had spoken of this last year. With the update to the entire policy manual, one of the things we want to do is make a definite reference to the nurse's manual, that's incorporated by reference, that we are supporting their policies and following their policies. They are following the policies, and we are allowing them to do that in the schools.
Mr. Rossignol?
Through the chair, to the chair. That is actually the nursing policy that they're going to follow. That's not what we're going to implement.
Right.
I just wanted that to be distributed to the board so that we can know exactly what they're going to be following through with.
Okay, so I think we're making this harder than it needs to be.
Yeah.
So there was a motion, what was your original motion, Mr. Rossignol? Just to follow?
The recommendations of Ms. Cameron and Ms. Wolf to allow the nursing staff to administer Narcan per their policy.
Okay, and it was seconded by Mrs. Carpenter. Any other comments on that?
I just don't want to, I don't want to belabor this, but observations need to be made for EpiPens, and I think the EpiPens in cabinets were also there for students or staff members that weren't necessarily known to suffer from allergies or things like that. And I'm okay going forward today with I don't know if it was Mr. Rossignol or Ms. Carpenter's motion. I'm all in favor of it. I think that when we have, and again, I'd like to see an expansion of this beyond the nursing staff, and maybe that's the distinction, is that in the location of Narcan and why it wouldn't be prevalent or present in multiple places within a building is something I'm not understanding either. But maybe we can get to that, and our toes are in the water now. But I don't see the distinction as to why we would have a policy for one and not the other. But I'm okay.
Okay. Okay. Roll call vote, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And now, let's talk Espert.
Yes, that's right. All right. And as you know, the governor has declared the opiate epidemic to be a public health emergency, and Espert is one of the tools that is being promoted as a way to help get a handle on this issue. So I want to just kind of start with a little bit of background. What does Espert mean? And it's an acronym. It stands for Screening, Brief Intervention, and Referral to Treatment. It's an evidence-based approach to delivering early intervention and treatment to people who either are already exhibiting or who are contemplating engaging in risky behaviors that would lead to a substance use disorder. So it is a screening, and it's different. I've been asked the question, how is this different from the Youth Health Survey or the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that's done in the schools every other year as part of the Healthy Peabody Collaborative's Drug-Free Communities program? And that is a survey designed to collect aggregate data to help us understand the scope of the problem and help us identify the impact our programs are having. This is very different. This is a screening. It's a clinical intervention around an individual child that is very similar to the way we do hearing and vision screening to identify a child who needs further services. As I said, Espert is an evidence-based program, and it's been found to actually have an impact in reducing risky behaviors in follow-up and evaluations done 6 months after the initial intervention. So, what does the data show? In Massachusetts, the number of unintentional opioid overdose deaths for 2014 have increased 65% since 2012. Peabody in that time period has had 26 opioid deaths. And last year in 2014, there were statewide about 1,100 opioid deaths, and those numbers are expected to increase once the medical examiner data is finalized. Talking specifically about adolescents, the National Survey on Drug Use shows that 15% of Massachusetts high school students have reported having their first drink of alcohol before the age of 13. 36% of high school students reported having had alcohol within the past 30 days. That is considered to be a current use. 7% of students reported that they had driven after having drunk alcohol. 18% reported that they had ridden with a driver who had been drinking alcohol. About 9% of high school students had reported past 30-day marijuana use, and about 11% of high school students had reported past 30-day illicit drug use. So that includes illegal street drugs as well as prescription drugs when the prescription was not intended for that person. Since 2005, more Massachusetts residents have died from drug overdoses than have died in motor vehicle accidents. I found that statistic to be very compelling. And one of the other pieces that's really important when you're thinking about adolescent drug use is that the earlier a person starts drinking, the higher the likelihood that that individual is going to develop a lifelong alcohol dependency. And that's because the developing adolescent brain is particularly vulnerable to the impacts of drugs and alcohol. So, given that data, the governor has declared opioid use as a public health epidemic, and his working group has recommended screening of students who might be at risk for substance use. The state legislature is currently considering legislation that would mandate these type of screenings. In fact, the state health department has advised us as recently as this past Friday that they expect this Espert screening to become a mandated screening within the near future. In light of the fact that they think this mandate may be coming forth, they've released some funding for planning grants for school districts to implement Espert. So that is the reason we're here tonight. What we would propose to do is to use implementation funding to train our school nurses, our guidance counselors, and other administrators that were identified by the school to receive training in Espert. And then we would pilot Espert screening of all 7th grade students. After the pilot project had done, we would evaluate the pilot and then consider extending the screening to 10th grade students. So the program a few years out would look like screening of 7th and 10th graders. So the way it would work is the screening would be universal within the selected grade level, and that's a really important point. This allows us to identify students who might not be on anybody's radar screen, but who are struggling quietly with, perhaps engaging in risky behaviors or thinking about it. But it also allows us to reinforce positive behaviors with the vast majority of students who are not at risk. So that's the screening piece, and I'll talk a little bit about the screening questionnaire. And did you receive materials that have the screening questionnaire and all that? They have. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a minute. So that's the first step of the process. It would be universal screening. For those students, depending on how they answer the questions, if they answer in the affirmative to any of the questions, there would then be a brief intervention. And that would actually happen immediately, in real time, by the person doing the screening. It would basically consist of motivational interviewing, which would be part of the training. The motivational interviewing, it's a technique, it's a non-judgmental conversation to help raise the students' awareness of the risks around the substance use and to help motivate them towards making a positive change. It's a technique that's designed to lead the student to identify what do they value about making a different choice, what resources and skills and ideas do they have for changing their own behavior in a healthy direction. Based on national data, it's expected that about 25% of students would fall into this category of needing a brief intervention. For students who are at higher risk because they've answered yes to multiple questions, those students would get referred to treatment, and that's kind of the last step of the SBIRT process. This means they'd be referred to specialized providers who can do a more in-depth assessment and provide them with more intensive follow-up treatment. That could either be on-site or out in the community. As you know, at the Higgins this year, we're piloting a behavioral health clinic. We've got clinicians on site 2 days a week who are providing services to students. So students who screen positive could be referred to those on-site providers, or they could be referred out to another provider in the community. And based on national data, we expect about between 1 and 10% of students to fall into that category of needing additional treatment. So we would use the CRAFT screening tool, which you have in front of you, and we'll talk about that more in a minute, but that is a validated screening tool. Parents and students both would have the opportunity to opt out of this process. The planning grant would help us develop the policy and procedures that need to be in place before we would implement this. Policies and procedures would include things like the notification and opt-out procedures, maintaining confidentiality, particularly when you have a student that the screener thinks might be at an immediate risk of harm, whether the screening would be done as a standalone process or whether it would be done in conjunction with the other screenings that are currently done, such as hearing, vision, heights, and weights. We would need to develop a protocol for what we do when a child screens positive. We would have protocols to link us to the other resources in the community that could provide treatment to children. And then there would be other issues that would be identified through this planning process. In terms of implementation costs, there'd be basically time for costs of staff training. The training is about a 6-hour training. There'd be administrative costs associated with the notification and opt-out procedures. We would need to backfill staff time during the actual screening days. For instance, if it were to be the nurses who are conducting the screenings, we wouldn't be able to keep the nurse's office at the Higgins closed while the nurses were engaged, so we would need to backfill. And then there would be a small stipend for the district SBIRT coordinator, who we would recommend would be our nurse leader. In terms of the screening tool, it's this CRAFT screening tool. It is a validated instrument, and the training basically requires you to follow the script as written because these questions have been validated. So the part A that you see in front of you is considered a pre-screening. Every student would get asked these 3 questions in addition to the first question in part B, the CAR question. If the student answers yes to any of the first three questions, they get asked all the questions in Part B. And then it's scored depending on their answer. So basically, you know, any student who answered yes to any question would receive a brief intervention immediately during the screening process. Any student who scored 2 or more yeses, that's considered to be a positive screen, and that would be a student who would be receiving more intensive assessment and referral to treatment. Right now, as you know, we have the Student Health Center at Peabody High School. They are actually using this craft tool already with every student who comes into them. And that's really what part of this process is. Primary care providers and emergency room providers are really being encouraged to wrap this into a comprehensive health visit. So that's what they're doing at the Student Health Center. Every student who goes in for services, no matter what it's for, is being screened with the craft. So I know you have Allison Kilcoyne coming before you in a few weeks, and you'll hear more from her about this, but she provided me with the data of between August and December of last year, she screened 139 students who've gone in for services. 28% of those students scored 1 or higher, and they received the brief intervention. 24% of the students screened were considered positive because they answered yes to 2 or more questions, and those students had a brief intervention. And 21% of the students actually entered into treatment with the full-time behavioral health clinician who's working out of the Student Health Center. So those numbers locally are right in line with what is being seen nationally in terms of the percentages of students who need to go on to additional treatment. So the big picture is that substance use is common, it's risky, it's often a marker for other unhealthy behaviors, and it's often undetected. Teens themselves don't always recognize the impact of alcohol or drugs might have on their health, on their brain development, or on their academic and social well-being. SBIRT is an opportunity for primary prevention, which means intervening to prevent a disease from occurring, and also secondary prevention, when you intervene to mitigate the impact of a disease that's already present. SBIRT is part of a comprehensive approach. Primary care providers, emergency room providers are being encouraged to incorporate this into their health care. But as the schools have been for other, as we're a safety net for kids, you know, we provide hearing and vision screening because there are some students who don't get that at their doctors, and there's some students who even don't have a doctor. This is another way in which SBIRT screening in the schools is that safety net to allow us to open up a dialogue between staff and students, to improve overall health and to find students early when they're beginning on a path and get them the help they need to get them on a better path. So that is the program in a nutshell, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Sharon. Mr. Rossignol? Mr. Rossignol? Yep.
Thank you. Actually, my first question was going to be why 7th grade, but I think you answered it with that last sentence. Find them early.
Exactly.
So, you know, it's funny, when we, I'm not loud enough tonight. You know, when we first looked at building the mall school, we always kept saying, as long as we can save one kid, we did our job and we did something positive. I look at this kind of in the same vein. If we can find one kid early enough that we can change their direction and change their path and intervene, then we've done something successful. So I thank you for bringing this forward. I thank you for your work, and I think this is nothing but a positive step to save some students that may not be making the best choices at a very vulnerable time in their life. So thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Rossignol. Any other comments or questions for Sharon or Brenda? Yeah, I'm sorry, Dr. Levine.
Thank you. I don't have any questions, but I do want to speak to this issue. And I apologize because it's already been a long meeting, but I feel a need to speak to this issue. Most of this community knows that my son went through Peabody High School as an addict. He was an opioid addict. He started exactly the way Sharon said, with experimenting with drinking in middle school. graduated to pills in the 9th and 10th grades, and then wound up with what was the rage at that time, OxyContin, in the 11th and 12th grades. He was also an outstanding athlete, and when I asked him how could he continue to play at such a high level while he was addicted to these opioids, he said, "Dad, I reached a point where I couldn't play without them." Takes over your body and your mind. You become a slave to the drug. The drug runs your life. As lucky as we are, because Joel has been clean 10 years and is a teacher and a baseball coach in a public school system, as lucky as we are, a number of students, a number of kids that he went to school with died. A number of kids took twice and 3 times the amount of time in years to beat their addiction. They went on with the rest of their lives, but in a very difficult way. And some kids never beat it. So in 2007, Governor Romney asked me to help establish recovery high schools throughout the state. We have 5, one in Beverly. Beverly was the first. And Recovery High Schools is an alternative school for kids who are in active addiction and need help beating that addiction. It is a high school. They do get a high school diploma. I believe in random student drug testing. Now, I know that that's not going to happen in the time that I have left in this school system as a superintendent, but if I were going to be here for 10 years, I would fight that battle, and it is a battle, because people will come out of the woodwork and claim that we are invading privacy. And I'm not going to get on that soapbox tonight. We don't have time. But I'd be happy to talk to anybody personally about it if you want to give me a call. However, that's the ultimate step, random student drug testing. I want to publicly congratulate the governor for having the guts to bring this opiate issue forward publicly. One of the greatest problems that we have with opiate addiction is that we shove it into the shadows. People are afraid and embarrassed to talk about it. And what we need to be doing is bringing it into the sunlight. This is the beginning step. This is another step, another arrow in the quiver that we must do in our fight against opiate addiction. Albert Einstein said that the very definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. That doesn't mean that we should stop doing what we're doing with curriculum, and it doesn't mean that we should stop doing with all of the other things that we do to try to prevent any sort of drug or alcohol addiction in schools. But we need to do more. We're losing the battle. Kids are dying. So anything that we can do to up the ante, to get us a better handle on kids early on. If we don't know you're sick, we can't help you. It's as simple as that. This is another way for us to get into the conversation. We need to do something like this. We need to do more. But this is a good step in the right direction, and I thank Sharon and Brenda for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Dr. Levine, for sharing that story with us and your comments. Mr. Rossignol?
Thank you. Through the chair to Ms. Cameron, how long will it take to train our staff to administer the test, and when do you see us, if this board moves forward with this, when do you see us implementing that?
Do you know what the time frame is for the grant announcements?
Yeah. So the grant that we had applied for the funding, I believe they're going to be announcing grant monies in March, sometime in March. And it was set forward, the understanding is that that will be a process of being able to plan and implement. So I personally don't see it being implemented into our school system until next year at some point.
Right. We could try to, because the training is 6 hours, so it's fairly intensive, and you know, I think there's benefit to doing it
the right way.
Exactly. So I foresee us doing it in a professional development day, perhaps at the beginning of the school year.
Okay. So you do not, I'm sorry, through the chair, so you don't anticipating any training being done this year? It will all be geared towards, let's say, August PD, and then implementing it right from September?
You know, there is actually an online SBIRT training that is a great introduction to SBIRT. It's a half-hour program, and it would probably be beneficial to have people start thinking about it, start getting an understanding of it this year so that they can kind of wrap their heads around the process. So when we get into training in the late summer, people will have a better understanding.
That's great. I mean, I'm sorry, through the chair. I would really appreciate if we started the ball rolling sooner rather than later, and not necessarily start this right because it's a new school year, because in actuality, they're now 6th graders, if we're talking about next year's 7th grade class. And if we could intervene in a current 7th grader's life this year, then we're actually kind of ahead of the curve.
Thank you. Any other comments? So would we?
That was going to be my next question. So do we need a motion to move forward with this testing procedure, or do we need a motion to go forward with applying for the grant? Or?
The grant deadline was actually last Friday.
Okay, so how can we help?
So we submitted the application hoping that there would be a successful outcome tonight. We would, I guess, need a motion that if we are funded to move forward, and maybe even if we're not funded, to find the means, because I think it's important. I also think that given the demonstrated risk in Peabody, I think it would be very unlikely that we're not funded. I think we will probably receive funding. Essex County as a whole has higher than the state average. We're the second highest in terms of the incidence rate of opioid
The county is the
deaths.
second highest county in the
Essex County is, yeah. And Peabody's numbers are significant, significant enough that we were received funding from the state to be part of this opiate task force. Lynn Salem and Peabody have funding together to work on this as a regional issue. So I think it's likely we will be funded, but
Funding or not, I'm sorry, through the chair, funding or not, I think we have to move forward through this. So I would make the recommendation to follow through with the training regimen that you had put forth, regardless of funding. So moved.
Second.
We've heard the motion by Mr. Rosenau, seconded by Mrs. Dunn. Dr. Levine, did you want to comment?
Yeah, just to clarify the proposal, Mr. Rosenau, could you include in your proposal to adopt not only the recommendation for training, but also the procedures? These are procedures. So I would like to be clear that the school committee supports the procedures for screening.
So moved.
And second on the
Seconded.
amendment.
Okay. So we have the motion, seconded. On the motion, Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. While I support this, I would just ask that if you don't get the grant, if you could come back and let us know so that we can discuss this budgetarily and determine the cost and the funding and how that's going to come out of our budget.
Yes. Mr. Hockman?
Yeah, and just on the motion, we're talking about training for 2016-17 7th and 10th grade teachers?
7th.
Just 7th?
Correct.
Okay. And if I may, through you to Ms. Murtagh? I'm sorry? Yeah, with regard to professional development in August, it sounds like this training would take one full day for 7th grade teachers. Is that realistic and feasible in your scheme of PD that's projected?
Can I just clarify? It wouldn't be all teachers. It would be the
Nurses,
school
guidance
nurses,
counselors.
the guidance counselors, and, whoever, Mr. Busey, if he designated one or two of the house masters or whatever they're called.
Yes,
So-
okay.
That would be doable.
Yeah.
Yes.
Just for clarification, my own, really, we're actually not even talking about teachers. We're really talking about nurses and guidance counselors.
Correct.
Okay.
Good. Okay, so we have the motion. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenau?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Great. And Sharon and Brenda, I've been thinking about it because of the late hour. Why don't you plan on taking Friday afternoon off after 12:30?
After 12:30.
Does that include me?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Brenda.
like to go back, though, to continued business, just to go back to the agenda. I know we've moved a couple of items to accommodate people who are here, but I wanted to go back to continued business. We have first MSBA Higgins project. Mrs. Dunn, anything on that to report?
We had our monthly meeting last Thursday, very well attended, lots of great questions and lots of good information. It's proceeding as planned, and our next meeting will be on the 4th week of February, the 4th Thursday, because of school vacation.
Great. Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. Number 2, lockdown procedures. Mr. Rossignol, anything to report?
Thank you. Through the chair to Dr. Levine, back in December, you had sent us this brief paragraph in response to the lockdown drill that we had at close of school. I would like to submit this to the newly formed safety committee that Ms. Carpenter chairs. But with that said, I know you were looking for feedback back in December, and we have 2 new members. I just wanted to give you that feedback before it goes to that safety committee, to be perfectly honest with you. The only line I like in this entire phrase is, when the reason for the lockdown has passed, parents will receive a ConnectEd message with information. That's the line I like. And I'll tell you why. I understand the purpose of the whole paragraph. The problem is timely and as soon as possible, and updates will never be as timely or as soon as possible or as immediate as a parent will want. In any situation where our kids' safety is at risk, I want 110% of our school administrators, our teachers, our staff be on the situation at hand and not have to tell us what's going on, tell parents what's going on. I want 100% undivided attention to whatever the situation is, to make sure that it is going to be handled 100% perfectly. So you asked for feedback. There's my feedback, but I would like to turn this over to the safety committee now, but please inform me when this will be discussed at your meeting. Thank you.
Dr. Levine, did you want to comment on that?
Just through the chair, to clarify for everybody involved, we had a lockdown procedure. It happened to be at a very difficult time of day when buses and parents were already coming to the schools that were involved. Some parents were particularly irritated because they didn't get any ConnectEd or alerts from my office. The procedures that I'm familiar with and that have been carried out in the past are exactly what you read, Tom, and that is that last sentence, that when the reason for the lockdown has passed, all parents will be notified. And again, in public, I have gone through the reasons why. Typically, if you send out an alert to parents that there's a lockdown and explain why, as soon as they see lockdown, they don't read any further. They're going to the school to get their kid, particularly elementary schools. I don't blame them for that reaction, but that's the very reason why we don't send out alerts prior to the lockdown, a reason for lockdown being over. However, because of the angst amongst some parents during that particular procedure, I did meet with the mayor and the police chief, and I decided to develop pilot language in case you wanted to adopt it. So going to the subcommittee is fine. We can discuss it there and make any changes or kill it, whatever it is that you guys decide. Right now, the procedure that's in place will stay in place, and that is when there's a reason for a lockdown, we will notify parents and the greater community when the reason for the lockdown has passed, until and unless you change that procedure.
Thank you.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. Is this proposed language change policy? Is this policy for our policy manual?
I think so. I think that would be, it's a question as to whether or not it's policy or procedure. It's probably procedure, right?
It's really procedure.
Yeah, it's really
So
procedure.
you're just looking for something to put out. It's not going to be part of our policy
That's
manual.
right. This is feedback from you guys and the mayor as to what you're comfortable with.
because if it was going to be policy, I was going to have a joint meeting with Mrs. Dunn, but if it's just a
It's really
procedural,
procedure.
then I'll mark it up for a meeting, and we'll bring back language.
Thank you. Mr. Hockman?
Yeah, thank you. Just through you to Dr. Levine, just so we're clear, it doesn't sound like you're in favor of changing this procedure. You just drafted it based upon events that took place earlier in the school year. Is that accurate?
Yeah, you know, as you have seen tonight, I'm pretty passionate and I'll fall on my sword for certain things. This isn't one of them. I'm willing to try this language as pilot language. Hopefully we don't ever need another lockdown. But if we did, I'd be willing to try this as a pilot to see whether or not those communications work. I am not necessarily recommending it.
I'm not, I don't think I've been blessed with sitting on the safety subcommittee. I will say that I'm more inclined to agree with Mr. Rossignol and would even go further. If we could, and I don't think we can, but if we could impose some sort of penalty upon parents that actually go to these schools, they in fact, and their intentions are good and they want to be helpful, but they in fact put first responders in danger. They put themselves in danger. They put students in danger unintentionally. But I couldn't agree more with Mr. Rossignol. This is something where all hands in the school department, the fire department, the police department, anyone else that's responding with the COPSing program that we put in, it could be any first responder that's in the vicinity, they need to focus their attention on the matter at hand. And they don't know that you're a parent of a student in that building. They're not necessarily familiar with parents who are arriving at the building with good intentions. And it puts them in harm's way more than they already are. So I'm not a voting member of that subcommittee. I would like to know when this gets on the agenda. I would like Police Chief Griffin involved in that conversation, and maybe even Chief Pasden. But I couldn't see supporting this language as it currently exists.
So, I mean, I don't think we need to get into that discussion today. I think we need to put that into the committee, because I have many comments to make as well. That probably be the other side that you guys have taken. But I don't think we need to get into that today. I think that needs to be discussed in committee. That's where we want to do that. Mrs. Dunn, though, briefly, did you want to?
Very briefly, I would just like to thank the superintendent, because I know that this is the result of after-event meetings, and that the incident, as all incidents were, the incident was well dissected afterwards. All the concerns that had been brought to Dr. Levine and to the staff were definitely, you can tell, they were discussed, and that they took the time to come up with this procedure. And I want to just say thank you, because it shows a great responsiveness and an understanding of the situation, and an attempt to try to, going forward, to do better the next time. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Excellent. So we'll put that into committee. I did want, at this particular moment, and I think everybody knows this, on Thursday evening, we're going to the City Council, again, based on a review of the incident earlier this school year. We wanted to seek additional funds from the City Council to address some of the issues that popped up, specifically obtaining Columbine locks for the doors at the South School, the Center School, and the West School, I believe. And also to get some blinds at window treatments at the Burke School. So that is on for Thursday evening. If you're able to come, that'll be terrific. I know Dr. Levine, Ms. Murtagh will be there. If you're able to come as well, the subcommittee meeting is at 6 o'clock on Thursday. Okay.
Just to let you know, I really want to go to that. I have a union meeting.
You have a union?
Yeah.
Meeting? Oh, you have negotiations? Okay.
Yeah, we have negotiations that night, so I would like to come, but I can't.
Yeah, well, understandable.
Okay.
But I know you strongly support
I
this.
do, and I really, if any of the other fellow committee members attend that aren't on negotiations, if you could just express.
No, I'll make sure that's noted, because you guys are going to be working very hard on the negotiations. But I know how each of you strongly support that, and I'll make sure that's noted at the meeting. Okay, let's go to public participation. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to come up and speak on a topic of their choosing? The microphone is open. Seeing no one, we will go now back to the superintendent's report. I know we have a number of items for Dr. Levine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I would just like the school committee to accept with appreciation donation of a Dobsonian telescope from Michael Sturgeon, who periodically makes donations to the school system with great appreciation.
Motion to approve with gratitude.
Second.
You've heard the motion, seconded, all in favor. It's been approved.
This is just an acknowledgement that the kids and community from our West School donated 430 pounds of food to the Haven from Hunger. And as you know, the Haven from Hunger has now a partnership with us, with our health clinic at the high school. You know, this is kind of a closing of the circle of how the community works together to help people in need. So I just wanted to acknowledge that with great thanks to the West School community and kids and parents. There are three communications, actually 4 communications from DESE. They all revolve around our leveling of schools. And as you know, we did very well this time around regarding MCAS. The West School actually found a mathematical mistake, appealed their accountability rating, and wound up with a accountability rating of 1, which is the top. So congratulations not only to the West School, its teachers. I was there today. I had an opportunity to go through every classroom. I also want to congratulate the principal. Tom has taken a great interest in data, was very, very insistent that he was a level 1, wrote a beautiful letter of appeal that I signed, this was a good procedure, and the state did indeed find that they had made an error. So congratulations to Tom Canaccio and everybody at the West School. Congratulations to the Higgins that has gone from a level 3 to a level 2. That's hard work by a lot of people, but mostly it's the teachers and the kids that work together every day in classrooms to make this happen. Congratulations to the Higgins. The Brown School has gone from a level 3 to a level 2. The Brown School particularly has a change in demographics over the past few years. Their student population is challenging, even taxing sometimes. We have many adults that sometimes are dealing with students who are in great difficulty emotionally, and to get them settled down and back to the business of academics is a tremendous talent and chore. It takes a great deal of energy and skill. Elaine, as you know, has been with us a long time. She's a long-time principal, and she has led this school on a tremendous journey to raise the academics and academic performance from a level 3 to a level 2. I congratulate Mrs. Metropolis and everybody at the Brown School for their hard work. I would like to get into, of course, I'm not doing very well tonight, but I'm going to get into this anyway, and that is MCAS versus PARCC. I am making a recommendation and asking for a motion that we adopt PARCC for the next 2 years, and I'll tell you why. Excuse me. If I lose this one, I'm taking my bat and ball and going home. As we know, there was quite a skunk fight in the state regarding MCAS versus PARCC. One of the reasons was, and by the way, one of our longest-serving school committee member, Dave McGeaney, who is not on the board any longer as he has decided not to run again, was a passionate critic of the process of developing these accountability standards in many different ways, and he was articulate and skilled at presenting that. What happened was that so many people complained about a lack of process in the development of these accountability standards that the Commissioner of Education in Massachusetts, who happens to be also the chair of the PARCC Commission nationally, he did resign, you know, accused of having a stake and an interest in going to Park, and was ready to go before the State Department of the State Board of Education, asking for the adoption of Park, which is it's a similar accountability standard as it is a standardized test, but it's based on different markings, and the questions are different. Even some of the materials are different that it's based on. So rather than going with the Common Core, is it the Common Core that we have in Massachusetts? No, yeah, Mass Frameworks. Mass Frameworks, it was going to be based on the National Common Core standards. There was a big hullabaloo, and he retreated at the end and eventually made a recommendation that he would establish a bipartisan commission to develop MCAS 2, a hybrid, which would be a combination of Park and MCAS. It is my contention that, knowing the proclivities of the commissioner, and many of my colleagues, this is not a criticism, many of my colleagues as superintendents, is a better exam, that MCAS 2.0, when it is adopted 2 or 3 years from now, will look a lot more like Park than it will MCAS. In order for us to get our kids ready for what will be the Park exam in 2018, what I believe will be much more looking like Park than MCAS, I would like to take the Park test now over the next 2 years. There are advantages for us to do so. Number one, it'll be like a practice test for 2 years for our kids. Number two, much of Park, or MCAS 2.0, will be on computers. We have to get our kids ready and used to taking an exam like this on a computer. By the way, we don't have full capacity yet to do this. So we will be testing, if you choose Park, we will be testing a grade level to take the exam on a computer to see how we do. Number three, we will be held harmless for the next 2 years. That means that the levels that we've attained, which are very good in Peabody right now, will be held harmless. We cannot go down no matter what we score in Park. We can only stay the same or improve. The high school is eliminated from this discussion because they have to take MCAS. We're talking about the elementary and middle school. I am therefore recommending, for the reasons that I stated, that we adopt. Now, by the way, there was the union, teachers union, during the discussion of Park or MCAS, strongly supported MCAS and even created a position paper regarding MCAS. My belief is that they did that during the discussion because they thought it was going to be a choice of Park versus MCAS at the time. That's not what happened at the table. They voted MCAS 2.0 and a hybrid, and they're developing that now. I believe it is much to our advantage and the advantage to our kids to take the Park test and use it as an example of what they're going to see in 2018 or 2019. So I am asking for a motion to adopt. By the way, I worked with the State Department of Education. We are well beyond the deadline to make this decision. They are allowing Peabody an extension to tonight for me to inform them tomorrow as our decision. If we choose MCAS, I have to order the MCAS materials, and they have extended the deadline for us to do so. If not, they will accept our decision to go to Park, and Kara and I will begin that process. Our principals voted unanimously to go to Park. I want you to know that. And that was without any prodding from me. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Levine. Mr. Amico?
Thank you, Dr. Levine, through the chair. I too have heard the same thing as an educator. Even though MCAS 2.0, 3 years down the road, is going to be called MCAS 2.0, it probably will look more like Park than it will the traditional MCAS. It will have components of Common Core, and it probably will have components of state frameworks as well. So I think we should move in that direction as well, moving to Park as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Amico. And Mr. Rossignol?
Thank you. Through the chair to Dr. Levine. So other communities around us have already moved to this Park fiasco. And most other communities had to spend millions of dollars to upgrade their computer system. not really to educate students, but basically to take a test. So how much money are we going to need to update our computer systems, which I think are a little bit inadequate? The software, all just designed for this one specific test.
To that, I don't know the exact answer to that, but since we'll only be piloting in one grade, it will be limited. I think that we have the capacity to take this test on computers that we presently have for the most part for one grade. And Kara, jump in.
So,
Go ahead. Please continue his question.
so one grade is going to be piloting Park, the other grades will be taking MCAS?
No, we're doing paper-based.
Right.
If Park is decided, we are going to have to do paper-based. We cannot do on the computer for anybody. It's all or none.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, Dr. Levine. And if we do MCAS, it's all going to be paper-based as well.
Mm-hmm.
We have to stay for grades 5 and 8 with MCAS science. ELA in math would be Park if you chose Park.
I'm sorry, can you say that last piece again?
Yes. ELA in math would be
Yeah.
MCAS. Would be Park if you chose Park. Science remains MCAS because they have not created a Park science assessment. No computers.
Through the chair. So once again, the divine powers that be are making us take Park. And I'll say making, because ultimately they're trying to get everybody on board in one way, shape, or form, however they want to spin it, without really having the tools, the framework for specific subject matter. Am I in the ballpark?
Well, no, PARC is based on the National Common Core, so there are standards there. We just haven't adopted that. I think we did adopt, we were asked to adopt Common Core when we started taking money for
Race to the Top.
Race to the Top.
Uh-huh.
But until then, we had our own curriculum frameworks, which quite frankly, I was part of developing, and they're good. They're good standards. So there is a standard, even PARC questions do have their own standards to look at. We just don't have them widespread in Massachusetts at this particular time.
So, I'm sorry,
Yeah, please.
just two more questions. You said that high school is still going to take the MCAS. Is there a sunset for that as of right now, or is that going to continue moving forward?
As soon as they adopt science for PARC, I'm sure that it'll look more like PARC than it will MCAS in 2018.
That MCAS 2.0.
Right.
So, I'm sorry, just for my own edification. So in 2 years, when MCAS 2.0 comes online, it should have all of the things that we already currently do.
Probably. May I also say, just, for the public's, a small majority of my colleagues, superintendents, believe PARC is a better test, which surprised me, quite frankly.
Through the chair, one last statement. Whether it's a better test or not is up for debate, to be perfectly honest with you. The thing that really frustrates me to no end, especially here in Massachusetts, you had a fantastic system in MCAS. You really did. You had educators that came up with the test. You had educators administering the test, and you had educators reviewing the test. That was our MCAS. That's our framework. That's what we built a world-class education from in Massachusetts. The rest of the country, I understand, there's all kinds of other issues going on. So we're taking that, a tried and true method, made by educators, administered by educators, read by educators, and now adopting, and this isn't directed towards you. I think I'm channeling Dave McGeaney at the moment. But now we are moving to a standardized test for the country, which I'm not necessarily in favor of, lack of a better word. But you do not have educators that made this test. You do not have educators reviewing this test. You have think tanks and you have the Gates of the world coming up with these so that they can turn around and basically sell software so that we have to come back and buy that annually. My soapbox is over. You hit the nail on the head. MCAS 2.0, PARC, modified, will happen in 2 years. Okay? So in my opinion, we have to start at least practicing what is going to be inevitable. What frustrates me to no end is that we're throwing away a system that has worked since, I think I actually took one of the pilots back in the 80s, to be perfectly honest with you. And it was refined as time moved on. And we're just throwing it to the heap for this new shiny car that we don't even know if it works.
Just quickly, if I could, Mr. Mayor, and I know we're getting long in the tooth here. I've done research on standardized testing. First of all, there used to be 27 or 30 states that adopted PARC. They've retreated to about 12 now. So the shine is off the apple as far as PARC is concerned, but not here in Massachusetts.
And that's unfortunate, by the way.
Secondly, standardized testing has its own history. I won't go into the whole history, but it's all the same. No matter what kind of standardized test has been developed in any state for education, the process is always the same. The first year it's implemented, the scores are low. Nobody knows what's being asked or how. Sometimes they know the answer, but the language in the question is different than what they were taught. Teachers take a look at it, they're smart people, and they go about the business of starting to massage their instruction to the language of the test and the structure of the test. Over a period of 7 years, scores begin to crawl upwards and then peak. And that's exactly what has happened with MCAS. Quite frankly, there are people that think the test scores are just too high. PARC is harder, and it's different, and they want to go back to that level again and start to build. And by the way, you're not terribly wrong. This is a multi-$100 million business with big companies like Pearson and others who get big contracts to develop these tests. So when you said they change course in order to develop new documents that cost money, you're absolutely correct, and it's big money.
You all set, Mr. McGuiney?
I am for now, thank you.
Mr. Olympio, then Mrs. Dunn.
Through the chair, Dr. Levine, is it your understanding that, big picture, that PARC will actually be cheaper to administer than MCAS?
No, I don't think there'll be any monetary difference, quite frankly. Once we get, if we get to a point where it's all computerized and there's no paper, we may have to spend some money to upgrade our computers. But we're doing that now, anyway, as a matter of course.
And is PARC administered twice a year, or?
We actually have the dates, Kara?
Yes, there's, our window for ELA and math is April 25th to May 27th. So we will design, if adopted by this committee.
It's over a period of weeks in the spring.
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you. Mrs. Dunn?
I have a couple of questions. Is the amount or the hours of testing the same for PARC and MCAS?
Kara?
It's timed. PARC is timed, but additional time, if needed, is given.
MCAS, especially with accommodations, is not a time test. This is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And how do they handle portfolios with PARC?
They still stay MCAS. At this point, MCAS alt.
Okay. And when the students are doing the PARC exam, my understanding was that it would be adaptive. And the explanation that I was given was that on the computer, that the students, if they answer a question in one fashion, they would then go on to another question. But if they got it wrong or didn't answer completely, they would be taken in another direction on the computerized test. It adapts to the student. In our district, if we do the PARCC exam on the computer in one grade, are we going to, do we have enough computers to do it in one grade? Do we have the capacity for the software to work on our computers? Does every school have the same technology?
Actually, before I answer that question, I misspoke. We were researching whether or not, we actually asked the State Department of Education whether or not we could do just one grade as a pilot for technology, and they denied that. I had forgotten that. What they said was either everybody has to do it on a computer or nobody does it on a computer. So for this year, we'll do all paper. We'll take a look at our capacity over the next few months. The answer to your question is probably not. Not every school is equally outfitted with technology that could do this test.
And that's honestly the issue that I have with the PARCC exam throughout the state of Massachusetts, that it is not designed to have an equitable testing of the students. Now, I know they say they're going to hold us harmless. Whenever the state says that, I don't believe them anyway. But I can remember when we were told that the MCAS scores were going to have absolutely no impact on the district. And then, as now, MCAS scores are used to rank communities. They set your real estate values. We're judged continuously by our MCAS scores, and now, you know, they've switched and now they rank our district with this 1, 2, 3, 4 level, and that's being used again to rank our community on these websites, and all kinds of decisions are being made based upon the MCAS scores in the city. So the PARCC exam, quote unquote, being held harmless, that's a nice way of them saying, well, we're not going to, you know, DESE isn't going to rank us, but we know they're going to. And we will be ranked against communities that have the technological capacity to give every child the PARCC exam on a computer, which I have no idea how valid our scores are on paper and pencil compared to some system that obviously is much more advanced with the technology. How do we have our students shine on that type of exam if we can't even give them the same test conditions? So to me, the PARCC exam is invalid right now until the state puts a computer in front of every kid in the state. Then it's equal, then it's equitable. And that's one of the reasons why I don't like that exam. Another reason that I don't like it is because this fall there's going to be a big referendum on Common Core curriculum anyway. So I don't understand how they can actually administer this test based upon the fact that if they have the students take it right now, come the fall, there may have to be a big shift with curriculum. I don't know what's going to happen with that vote. I have no idea how far it's going to go or what the powers that be are going to decide. But I do know that right now the MCAS exam is definitely, it is a tried and true exam. When it started, and I do remember when it started, there were a lot of difficulties, and Dr. Levine, I do remember learning that, you know, after 7 years, the scores were going to peak. And I also remember learning that the wealthy communities were going to do very well, but that when they could no longer do exceedingly well, that we would be changing the exam. Voila, here we are. So, you know, if I felt that the exam was going to help our staff, I wouldn't have as many worries. But right now, I feel like we're going to be telling the staff, okay, here's another tool. Granted, we have all kinds of assessments that they use, but we're going to make them change a lot of the way that they approach the test, because no matter what anyone says, I know no one's teaching to the test, but they're teaching the children to take that test. And many of the children have learned how to take MCAS, and now you're going to have to teach them how to take the PARCC exam, because it isn't just the educational knowledge that is being tested, it is the test-taking ability of a student that's being tested, and we're really going to shake them up. I don't know how much lead time you need to teach a child a different method of a test or different information on a test. I know that MCAS had some hard times as far as the way it was prepared, the way that it was designed. It was a very interesting presentation that I sat through and learned about how that test was actually physically crafted. And I'm tired of having the students be the lab rats. I really am, because I've seen what has happened to people in the past when MCAS came in and how everything was stood on its head. If the PARCC exam going forward is going to be a technology test, we need to really work with our students to train them to be able to take it on the computers. We don't teach keyboarding skills, do we?
We haphazardly.
I know.
Not across the district.
Right, and it's a timed test. So if you have someone who's all thumbs and isn't good at typing, and I know this sounds really silly, but I had an argument with one of the other superintendents before you about the need for keyboarding skills.
Yeah.
And I was told, well, they're never going to use a typewriter. Exhibit A, the keyboard on a computer is the same keyboard on a typewriter, and the skills needed to type, whether it is a typewriter or a computer, it is the same type of training. We do not have a keyboarding class, and I'm using that term probably, very loosely, but we have never had a specific class to teach our children speed on response on a computer. I think our students would be at a deficit where other communities who already have the technology, and that is part of our problem. We haven't had a computer for every child, so we haven't been able to give those classes. I mean, we had computer labs that had to use parent volunteers to staff them. Putting our students in that type of a situation, to me, is wrong. So I know we could go on and talk forever about this, and I will stop. I wish I had the power of my voice that Mr. McGeaney did, because I think he would explain it even more eloquently. But right now, I honestly do not feel comfortable putting our kids into the PARCC mess.
Through the chair. Everything you said is accurate. Just putting the odds in the favor of one way or the other, the reason I'm recommending PARCC is because I think we're going to have no choice 2 years from now.
Oh, I know we're not going to have a choice.
So-
I want 2 years to get ready for our kids.
Thank you. Mr. Miko?
So I agree with a lot of what everyone's saying here, and the only reason why I'm leaning towards PARCC again is because it's a practice test for 2 years. It won't touch our levels. We'll be, the Higgins School will be a level 2. The West School will still be a level 1 for the next 2 years. That's great. It's, like I said, it's practice for 2 years. The only question I have is, would we be able to see the data on the PARCC exams to better prepare for MCAS 2.0 3 years down the road?
It's an excellent question, because this year the data was not available to us. It will be available. Yeah.
Thank you. Mr. Hockman, then Mrs. Carpenter.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief here. Thank you for giving us a choice, but we really don't have a choice. MCAS 2 is an iteration of PARCC. It's a divergence from MCAS. To Ms. Dunn's point, I think whatever we see come out of the state, DESC, whether it be PARCC or MCAS 2 or MCAS 3, it's going to be electronic. It's going to be online in 2, 3, 4 years, whenever that's going to be. Through the mayor to Ms. Murtagh, I know you've been working very, very hard on a technology plan. It has the, I think you said that we'll see some sort of product from that committee in the near future. Is this part of the conversation? Are you talking about bandwidth, which is I think even a bigger problem than actual devices. Is that part of the conversation?
Yes. Yes, access point bandwidth, devices, all of that is part of the conversation.
Thank you.
If I may just jump in on that, some of the bandwidth that's coming out of the old Higgins is going to be able to be transferred to other places because they won't need it in the new school. So that's going to help us expand somewhat, both at the elementary, and we're definitely going to budget for expansion at the high school because you're going to get a proposal to fund a ninth grade one-to-one at the high school. And we need the bandwidth in order to do that.
So sometime in the near future, we're going to see a dollar figure associated with the cost for increasing bandwidth and perhaps devices too, if we're going one-to-one. With the park, again through you, sir, to either Ms. Martag or Dr. Levine, in the initial version that I think was administered in 15, I don't believe that there were any accommodations provided. Is that changed?
The accommodations will be, they can have accommodations this time around, but certain accommodations like a checklist, there are variables, so I will get that information to you.
Yeah,
It's a little different.
We do have a considerable number of students in the district on IEPs, and I am concerned with providing them appropriate accommodations as is directed through their IEP, and that's it's always been a big concern for me with regard to the park. Dr. Levine, through the mayor, I know that you responded to Mr. Amico's question with regard to us receiving the results of the exam. Are parents going to receive the results of the exam?
I believe if they're available to us, they'll be available to parents as MCAS would be.
Okay, so just in closing, I think we're given a choice that's no choice at all, and that's due to no fault of Dr. Levine. I think that the ruse that is now in place with the creation of MCAS 2 is that it is park with minor differences. I agree with Mr. Rosignol and Ms. Dunn. If we could stay with MCAS, I think we all would prefer that, but that's not going to be the choice that we have. And lastly, I guess, so you're saying in 18, your anticipation is that park will be the only choice?
They're going to call it 2.0.
Okay.
And it's going to be a hybrid. I think it'll lean much more heavily toward park than it will toward MCAS.
So our vote tonight is solely for which test is administered in this school year?
This coming school year.
This coming school year.
Yeah,
So
you would, if anything changes, by the way, Dunn brought up a great point. If anything changes by vote,
A referendum.
for example, we can change back next year easily.
So to that point, we could also, based upon the result of the referendum, opt for park in the 16-17 school year and have 1 year of practice, if you will, under the way you're describing it. Is that
That's right.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. A lot of things that I wanted to talk about and say have already been said. A couple of things that I want to point out. Park, right now, you had said that all the principals unanimously wanted to go with it, and you did mention the union's letter, which I did get a copy of the union's letter, which was dated from September 28th of 2015, and it was their position on switching over to Park, which we did post on our website. I had an opportunity to speak with the union the other night to ask them if they would be prepared to submit another statement letter to us. And the response was, you may white out the date on our old letter and update it to tonight's meeting. I did make copies of it. I know that we have 2 new committee members.
Motion to receive.
Second.
All in favor? It's a vote.
Thank you. So if you want to take a moment, I don't know if you've seen it or not, if you've read it, it's their position, which basically says that they do not want to go to Park. My opinion right now is we do have a choice. From what I'm hearing about Park at this point is it's not complete. They don't have the science portion together. They don't have portfolios for special education. Their commissioner, whether he stepped down or was asked to step down or however it worked out, now the secretary is now their chairman, who has no educational experience whatsoever. I feel like it's still a work in progress, and the choice is the fact that so many of us exercised our choice in the previous years. We forced these things to happen. Just by sitting here and saying we don't have a choice, then it just lets it happen. It doesn't have to happen. We have a choice right now. Mr. McGeady brought out so many things that a lot of people knew nothing about and brought them to light. And I firmly believe because of that, these choices are happening. I'm not prepared to move to Park. Park is not prepared to move to Park. They don't even have 5th and 8th grade MCAS science. They're not ready. I don't feel like being guinea pigs. Who knows what's going to happen in 2 years? They're saying you're going to be forced to do it. We don't know that. We thought we were going to be forced now. We're not. I don't think we should move to Park right now. They have a lot of work to get done. And if we just look at the results of our MCAS, the updates that we got in our packet tonight, we have so much to be proud of. We're fine where we are. They can figure out Park. They have so many holes in that right now. We don't need to be part of it. So I think you understand what my position is, and
Ms. Dunn.
that's all I have to say.
Thank you. What I wanted to bring up was, it was either last spring or the spring before it, I had actually requested a report on the cost to the city of Peabody regarding the increase in bandwidth we would need, regarding the increase in technology we would need in the schools, the cost of the program to be able to take the Park exam. And actually, I even had a question about the cost of rewiring certain classrooms to be able to support the technology we needed to take just this test. And I don't know at what point that report may be at. I would be very interested in seeing those figures still. I've always wanted to see it because I wanted people to understand how much this test is going to cost. It's not free. It's not going to get transmitted over the internet into our schools for nothing. There's a fee for this, and there's a fee for an MCAS booklet, and I know we have to pay for those. But in order to have the test, we've got to buy a computer to be able to have the test administered to the students. So even right now, I cannot support it. I'm sorry, Dr. Levine, I cannot support it because I do have the choice. And I'm sticking with the decision that we have made in the past in this community to wait and see exactly what is going to happen with Park MCAS 2 or whatever other name they come up with, because they're not looking at the broad picture of what type of students we educate. If they really were doing that, then they would have designed a test that was ready to roll out day one, it would be valid, and they would have all the pieces in place. We're missing very important pieces on this exam. And the fact that they're saying hold harmless and that we would stay where we are, you know what? We're a level 3 community. Now we know what that means, but the newspapers don't. So they're going to continue to report, oh, they're a level 3 community. And it affects everything that we try to do. So, nope, I'm telling you right now, I'm not supporting it because they're going to come up with something else next year. And in the meantime, we're going to be saving up to buy the appropriate computers that we need for our students to be able to take this test. But we've got a lot of groundwork that we ourselves need to do here to get ready for these online tests. And I think the state should pony up some money for that. And they're not. They're leaving us high and dry, and they're not giving us the full picture. They're not giving us the full package. They're doing this halfway, and then they're going to stick us with the mess. So I think we have to look at the full big picture and realize they don't know what they're doing right now. They're grasping at straws. They're trying to save their names, they're trying to save their careers, and they're trying to save something that they haven't completed yet, and they're giving us something that's just being done halfway. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. Mr. Rossignol?
Thank you. Through the chair to Dr. Levine. Across the state, how many school districts do you think are still with MCAS?
I think it's a little bit more than 50% have now gone to PAC, but I'm not sure of that number. The number that is typically thrown out is a little more than 50%. I was surprised at the number of my colleagues that were thought PAC was a really good exam, if there is such a thing.
Well, I mean, that just goes to the debate of standardized testing in general. But
yeah. There are certainly school systems that are staying with MCAS, regardless, for many of the reasons that Mrs. Dunn and Mrs. Carpenter have promoted, including the technology piece, and including projecting into the future that maybe this thing's on shaky ground and it won't exist 2 years from now.
Yeah, you have the floor, Mr. Rossignol.
Just for my own edification, all of our materials, our educational materials, are they geared towards MCAS, PARC, or a hybrid of kind of both?
I would get, well, this would be the expert there, but I would guess that we're still geared toward MCAS for the most part.
Well said, Tom.
Thank you.
Mr. Miko?
And certainly with that, through the chair, of course, instructional methods will have to be looked at, going from state frameworks to Common Core or a hybrid of both. Again, the practice for 2 years, the fact that it's on paper for 2 years, we don't have to pay for upgrades in computers. And if the state mandates a MCAS 2.0 on computers, they're going to have to put some money into it, into communities. I don't think they can just have the communities rely on paying for all their upgrades. I just don't see that happening if it's state mandated that you're taking a MCAS 2.0 on computer. I hope I'm wrong.
You haven't been here long enough.
I know. Oh my goodness.
Well, that's all I wanted to
Unfunded
say.
mandates is the state's mantra.
Mrs. Dunn, but then after this, you're all done.
I know. I'm going to give you one example, one more shot at this. Okay. We had a wonderful presentation from Mrs. Metropolis recently about the, oh my goodness. The grand reveal. Okay. And one of the best parts of the grand reveal was that the students who have now been tasked with, oh my goodness, stamina.
Writing stamina.
The stamina to answer the essay questions on the MCAS. We have an entire school system that is now working on giving our children the stamina to write. They're learning a skill. It was a skill that they need for an exam. So all those children who have built up the stamina to write are now going to be faced with a typing test, and we haven't given them the proper training to execute that. So I'm going to leave you with that example.
I just want to, if I could, through the chair, just correct the rest. Since we took Race to the Top money, we had to develop at least some of the Common Core. And we've been incorporating the Common Core as well as MCAS. We probably lean toward MCAS, but we're not totally blind to the Common Core.
I'm going to go to Mrs. Carpenter, then Mr. Hockman, and then we're going to wrap it up. I think everybody probably knows their positions on this. Mrs. Carpenter?
I just had a question through the chair, Dr. Levine. You said that there was a large group of superintendents that were in favor of the PARC exam?
Yeah.
Could you just clarify for me? The information that I had was we didn't get to see the test, we didn't get to see the results. Was that something that the superintendents got to see already?
Not to my knowledge. They like the structure of the test. They think the structure of the test, based on the Common Core, is a better way to go than the structure of an MCAS test based on state frameworks. So it's more philosophical and also concrete as far as the development of the test is concerned, what it looks like, as opposed to results. They weren't basing that opinion on results.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Hockman. Sure?
I just
Mr.
have
Rosen?
one. So if we vote in the affirmative to move to Park, that's for just 1 year?
Yes.
Mr. Hockman, sure, you'd be afforded time.
The reason that I think Ms. Metropolis and started with the grand reveal and writing stamina is because all these kids are already typing. They're not writing. So I think that they already have the keyboard skills. They're using it on their phones and texting. They might not be writing English, but they know where the keys are on the keyboard. That was all.
Okay. I don't
Motion
think we
to
have a...
suspend the rules. We're almost to 11 o'clock.
Okay.
Second.
All in favor to
This-
stay a
this
little
is-
bit later?
Can I explain to the new members? This is taking a vote to meet past 11 PM.
We still got a lot to do.
All right, so anybody would like to make a motion to move to Park?
Support the recommendation.
Support the recommendation of superintendent and move to Park. Anybody like to make that motion?
So moved.
I'll second it because I think it deserves a vote.
Absolutely.
Okay. Further motion by Mr. Rossignol, seconded by Mr. Hockman. Roll call vote?
No.
I'm going to grandstand just a little bit, as Jared did earlier. I look to my educators to make my decisions for me when it comes to true educational needs. And this is the recommendation of Dr. Levine and Ms. Murtagh, so I'm going to support it. So yes.
I don't think we're supposed to talk after a motion is.
You're not.
And we're taking a vote. It's happened twice tonight, but I don't think
Yeah,
it's
I've
supposed to
let it go a
happen
little
anymore. So I'm going to say I also look to the educators, and based on what the teachers' union has stated, they don't want to. No.
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 Yes.
Okay. I have one more try at this thing.
Oh, Moses, oh, Moses.
It's language for RFP. Not on there is my recommendation that, let's see, how should I frame this if I really want it passed?
Don't ask us.
What a food.
We're getting very close to preparing for the summer. There are grant monies available for summer program that would benefit our kids. I am asking for a motion to extend FKO's contract through 8/31 while we continue the process of developing the RFP language, which I promised to have to you 2 weeks from tonight.
Make a motion to follow the recommendation of the superintendent.
Second.
Okay, you've heard the motion by Mr. Rossignol, seconded by Mrs. Dunn. Mrs. Carpenter.
Before we start voting, we're really, I mean, I'm in favor of it, that's fine, getting us through the summer, but we're definitely going to start getting this out to bid. The process is going to begin within the next 2 weeks. We're going to see I mean, this is for sure. 'cause
Absolutely. I will get draft language to you for the next meeting. It will be in your packet, and you will have an opportunity to take a look at it, make any recommendations for change, and then we'll put it out.
And just one more clarification. The grant money that I assume 4Kids Only is applying for, is it just for the summer, or is it something that's going to bind them through the next school year?
Well, it happens to be state money for the summer, but they have other programs, whether they get a contract with us or not, that where monies are available to them as an organization.
Mhm.
So I'm not sure how much money the grant is for, but I know part of it will at least apply to us.
Okay.
And, yeah, this is something I think we should put on the next agenda, because I know Mrs. Dunn has some good information as well to add to this, and I think this is when we got to start moving.
Okay.
Mrs. Dunn?
Just a request that we could have the proposed contract for that extension prior to the execution of the contract.
Will do.
Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Rossignol?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Linfield?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Yay.
Hey, one for three batting in Major League Baseball, 1 for 3, you're in the Hall of Fame.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right. Oh, we still got a couple more items.
Do we?
Oh, yeah.
Is there anything that can be put off?
Oh, yeah.
Actually, I'll take the next one.
Oh, I did have it on the agenda. It was on the next page. Very flustered tonight, folks. Pilot language for lockdowns, we already talked about. Oh, very quickly, I'm just asking you to approve the the last item, vocational director job description. I made some changes and updates, and we need to put this out as I finish the business manager's search. We need to put out the vocational director's search. So you have the job description. You can, if you need more time, you can approve it 2 weeks from now. It's not an issue of that's an emergency.
If we could defer this for 2 weeks, I'd appreciate it.
Great, but I will ask for a motion to approve. If you have any changes that you'd like to see, would you get them to me in the next couple of weeks? And the last item would be an item that I think Mr. Rossignol would like to speak to.
Thank you. Through the chair to the board. Currently, we are having more or less volunteers have to pay to get their fingerprint done. So what I'd like to make a motion of is any stipend position, non-union, non-binding, any stipend position of $1,000 and less, that if they submit a receipt to the school department, that they get reimbursed for getting their fingerprinting done. I don't disagree that if you're getting a stipend, you need to be fingerprinted. It's a safety net for our students. What's ending up happening, though, is you have parent volunteers for, let's say, 5th grade basketball who end up taking that stipend and distribute it more or less for the kids, now having to pay out of their pocket to go get the fingerprinting done on their own. So while I agree they should be, because they're getting the stipend, they're ending up turning that money plus their own money over. So I want to make a motion that any stipend position, non-union, of $1,000 and less can submit their receipt that they got fingerprinted to the school department to get reimbursed.
Second.
So moved.
On the, so can you give me more examples of who would that pertain to?
So basically, a lot of it would be like 5th grade basketball or a box program or some of different parents that are volunteering. They are getting a stipend, but the stipend ends up just being funneled right back to the kids. So now not only are they really not making money, but they're also paying the $35, having to take a day off of work, go to Salem and get fingerprinted as well. So to me, it's just a good faith gesture for these people that are non-union, so they're not already in a current contract, they're not already getting their job through us, the ability to at least get reimbursed the $35 to go and get their fingerprint done.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. Question, Dr. Levine or Ms. Mertag, are we fingerprinting volunteers?
No.
We're not.
So the state law is that everybody who receives a paycheck from a school system must be fingerprinted.
Okay.
You must be considered an employee.
Okay. All right.
And I'm sorry, through the chair, and that's why I said stipend positions only, because now it at least draws a line in the sand.
That's what I wanted to clarify. Okay.
So the motion was made by Mr. Rossignol, seconded by Mr. Amico. On the motion, Mr. Hockman?
Yeah, I should know this. We just negotiated with Unit A, but my memory is that unit members, and I understand the distinction for non-union, but union members are currently paying that fee on their own.
They are.
Correct.
They are. The difference is, if I may speak for Mr. Rossignol, the difference is that most people in that category are making fairly significant, it's their job, it's their livelihood. What Mr. Rossignol is trying to address is the parent volunteer who's making $500, turning that $500 back into the program usually, and then actually having to pay out of pocket or out of that small stipend, $35 to be fingerprinted. So that's why the Mendoza line of $1,000 is recommended.
Yeah, no, I understand now. Is there, through you, Mr. Mayor, to the superintendent, is there a provision for a waiver at the state level for
No.
this type of situation?
No, if you get a paycheck at all, it can be $1, it can be $1 million. You must be fingerprinted. You're considered an employee.
It's getting late. I don't want to. I just have I understand the intent. I have a little concern with the difference in how we treat union and non-union people in this regard, because this was an issue that the union did seek to bargain for in the last round of negotiations. Are we capable of administering, of hiring or bringing in someone who is able to administer the fingerprinting?
We do that, actually. We have brought in on a number of days folks to do the fingerprinting, the company that we use. But that, whether they do it on site or they do it at their place of employment, which in this case is Salem, you still have to pay the fee. The convenience for our teachers was that we had it on site at least 3 different occasions.
Right.
Also, the philosophy, I understand your concern about the difference between union and non-union, but this is a condition of employment according to state mandate for union members, for teachers, for example. It is not so for parent volunteer, and I think that's what Tom's trying to address.
No, and I've gone through this argument, if I may. It's a safety concern. I mean, that's the reason for the fingerprinting, is the safety concern to make sure that we have appropriate people around kids and students. And, talk about, through you to maybe Mr. Miko, talk about unfunded mandates. This is something that, was frankly negotiated at the legislative level, and the teachers union wasn't able to convince the legislature to fund this expense. And I understand that the fallout with regard to, low paid stipended positions who are generally just volunteers looking to help out. I just hate to have that cost borne by the district. Is there any, could we request from someone, perhaps DESE waivers? I mean, I know you're saying they're not there.
It's not a DSE, excuse me, I don't think it's a DSE mandate. I think it's a legislative mandate. But even so, there are no waivers. It's a mandate.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Rossignol, do you have any idea how many people we're talking about? Like under 50?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I think fewer than 10.
Yeah, yeah, we're not,
Yeah.
All right.
yeah,
One coach per school.
right. And they have to submit it and, right.
Okay. Roll call.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Rossignol?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mr. Miko?
Yes.
Okay. Well, the next one, written communications, that's not something that's really much up for discussion, right?
Put it on for the next one, please.
And could we also receive, there's a letter on our desk, if we could receive it, make it part of written communications? So moved.
Or do you want to have an old-time
I
meeting,
do
like
want to speak to
midnight?
that. Is that from Ms.?
Yes. It was complimenting on the staff.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I see.
Through the mayor. I mean, yeah, through the chair. You are the mayor. In the chair. I don't want to, you do have a letter in front of you, and I don't want to talk about names because it involves medical information that I do not and did not seek permission to talk about publicly. However, I do want to bring your attention to a letter from a parent regarding her son's treatment by one of our nurses, and the nurse is Kathy Walsh. And as you read the letter, the letter is beautifully written, and it's a wonderful letter of praise for Nurse Walsh, but I don't think that it speaks to the gravity of what she actually caught before something more serious happened. So next time you see her at the West School or somewhere, and by the way, she's extremely embarrassed by the letter. I went to see her today, as most modest people are. But she really did quite a thing here, and she deserves a great deal of praise. And I would ask the school committee to direct the superintendent to draw a letter stating such.
So moved.
Second.
Next item is...
Did I win that too?
Yeah, you did. You're on a roll.
Subcommittee reports. Any member want to make any reports that can't wait till the next one? Yep, Mr. Hogman.
Special Education Subcommittee is going to be meeting on February 9th at, which falls under the Education Subcommittee. Here at the Kiley at 5, I think we have a executive session at 6, so we'll meet at 5 o'clock before that executive session. And I just also want to point out that I know our student counselor was here earlier tonight reporting, mentioned the spaghetti dinner, the senior spaghetti dinner, which is scheduled for April 2nd. I was privileged to attend the last parent meeting for that, and I want to report out on their behalf that the next parent meeting for the senior spaghetti dinner is February 2nd at the Melting Pot at 6 p.m.
Thank you. I know Mrs. Dunn.
We do
Go
have
ahead.
something that
Yep.
needs to take action. I will provide the report for the Parent Advisory Board at our next meeting. But one of the items that came from the Parent Advisory Board, and I have spoken of this in the past, was that the parents had volunteered and came forward with a survey which I provided to Dr. Levine. This would be a survey to find opinions and requests on after and before school care. And it has been adjusted by Parent Advisory Board members and by Dr. Levine. And if the committee agrees to send this out, this can be sent out tomorrow with a return date of next Wednesday, so that the staff could compile it and actually see what some of the things are that people are looking for, and if necessary, include that in the RFP. So I would like to make a motion that, that this survey be sent out tomorrow to with all the students in the backpacks, and to be returned in 1 week. So move.
Second.
Heard the motion by Mrs. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Olympio. Any comments? Roll call vote, please.
Yes.
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 And I did want to say, having Mr. Miko and Mr. Olympio at the meeting was very nice, and the parents were really very, very happy to have them serving on the subcommittee as well.
Great. No, and I think that survey is terrific, and I appreciate the Parent Advisory Board putting that together. I think that'll be a great tool for us. So I'm thrilled about that.
And through the mayor, and we will translate that appropriately.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That was one of the questions that they had. And they also suggested, if possible, to have a Connect Ed message on Monday reminding people to return that.
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
Okay. Mrs. Carpenter?
Just wanted to report out on the Finance
Yep.
Subcommittee. Although I was assigned chair, Mr. Hockman did finish out some stuff, and I'd like him to report out on it.
Sure.
Is that okay?
Mr. Hockman, you comfortable with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
First, before I report out, and I want to thank Ms. Carpenter for the courtesy of allowing me to continue as the, I guess, I don't know, Chair of Finance for the purpose of completing or purpose of continuing to negotiate with Unit A. So thank you for that, and thank the Mayor for that as well. I do want to report out that we have a tentative agreement with Unit A. We had a nice meeting last night and reached a tentative agreement last night, so it's subject to ratification. I want to thank Ms. Carpenter and Mr. Rosignol, Superintendent Levine, Assistant Superintendent Murtagh, Mayor Betancourt, Attorney Khan, and everyone else that helped in the efforts to get us to this point.
Great. And I want to thank the three of you as well. Thank you. Okay, I have a couple of items to report out of committee today. We met prior to the regular meeting. First, we met in executive session. There was a motion made in executive session that I wanted to bring out today for a vote. The motion was to extend the contract for Dr. Herbert Levine to remain as interim superintendent from July 1st, 2016 to July 1st, 2017. And that contract would be worked out with Dr. Levine for that with the same salary as he currently makes now. And if somebody could make a motion.
Motion to follow the mayor's recommendations.
Second?
Further motion by Mr. Rossignol, seconded by Mrs. Dunn. Roll call vote.
Yes.
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 Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Olympia?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. And I also want a couple of motions were made in the Building and Grounds Subcommittee meeting we had prior to this evening's meeting. The first motion was to approve the submission of statement of interests for the core repair program, to make that application to the core repair program for, in this order, the Welch School. The Welch School is the windows and the interior heat ventilation systems. Second is the Center School feasibility study to determine the future of the Center School. And the third is the Burke School, and that is for the
Univents.
Univents. Thank you. And if the committee votes to approve those requests, they will go to the City Council for a vote as well. That was the first motion, and if somebody could make that motion as well.
Motion to follow the recommendation of the mayor.
Second.
You've heard the motion by Mrs. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Rossignol. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Rossignol?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Olympia?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
And I wanted to mention that at the Building and Grounds Subcommittee meeting, our Facilities Director, Tim Healy, met with us. We reviewed the condition of our school buildings. There's more to be done. We're going to have a future meeting to continue that discussion. But these were also his recommendations for work that he saw that were most in need. So I wanted to mention him and thank him for being here. The other motion that was made was to allow me as mayor to hire a real estate appraiser to conduct a appraisal for the Kiley School. And that motion was also made and approved in subcommittee.
Make a motion to bring that forward before the whole board.
Second?
Thank you, Mr. Rossignol for the motion, Mrs. Dunn for the second. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hoffman?
Yes.
Mr. Rossignol?
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn?
Yes.
Mr. Olympia?
Yes.
Mr. Amico?
Yes.
Great. New business to be conducted in the regular course. Long meeting today, we accomplished a lot. There was a lot of important items on the agenda. I want to thank everybody for their time and work in this regard. We good?
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Through the chair, to the chair. Moving forward with the condition of this building, should we now house our meetings at City Hall?
You're speaking my language. I would like to, and I'd move to have future meetings at the Peabody City Hall, starting the next scheduled meeting.
Do you have a location? I'm sorry. Is there a specific location you're thinking about?
The Wigan Auditorium. Yep. I've already secured those dates, should we decide to do that. The idea being eventually the Higgins, or maybe we can look at some other locations, but to me, this location is not suiting our needs and is not representative of I feel, what the gravity of these meetings, and I'd like to move to the City Hall.
Do you believe you're in need of a motion on this?
No, but I just wanted to make sure everybody was comfortable with that. No, we don't need a motion.
I just wanted people to know where we're going to be next.
No, and we'll make sure we broadcast that, but we want to make sure everybody knows that. Sorry. It's closer for you, though. You want to what?
One that doesn't break.
We'll work that out. Thank you, everybody. Motion to adjourn, everybody approved, thank you.